Welcome to Luke's Stories, where camping isn't all about campfires and stars, but also nightmares in the dark. My name is Jeffrey Walker, and this happened to me on October 15th, 1996. I had taken my old RV out to the Ozarks for a weekend camping trip. It was supposed to be a peaceful escape from my job in St. Louis. I'd always loved the solitude and the sense of disconnect from the world. My wife Karen had passed away a few years back, and these trips were my way of dealing with the grief. The weather was perfect that weekend, sunny with a slight breeze. I set up camp near a small, clear stream. The leaves were just starting to turn, and the forest was full of reds and golds. I parked the RV in a clearing and started a fire. It was just me and my dog, Rusty, an old but loyal German shepherd. That first day, I hiked a few trails, fished in the stream, and relaxed by the fire. I didn't see another soul, which was just how I liked it. As night fell, the forest became alive with the sounds of crickets and distant owls. I cooked some dinner over the fire and settled in with a beer. Rusty lay by my feet, staring into the flames. Around midnight, I heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. It wasn't unusual to hear animals moving around at night, but this sounded different. Rusty perked up, ears pointed, and started a low rumble in his throat. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the noise, but saw nothing. I shrugged it off and went back to my beer, though I kept the flashlight within reach. The next day was more of the same, hiking and fishing. I found an old abandoned cabin deeper in the woods. It looked like it had been there for decades, windows broken, roof caved in. I poked around a bit, but didn't find anything interesting. I headed back to camp as the sun started to set, planning to turn in early. That night, things got stranger. Around the same time, just past midnight, Rusty started growling again. This time, it was more intense. I heard the rustling again, closer. This time, I grabbed my flashlight and the knife and stepped out of the RV. I shone the light into the trees, and this time I saw it clearly. A tall, gaunt figure, its eyes reflecting the light. It was humanoid but twisted, with long limbs and a hunched back. It was covered in matted fur, and its face was distorted, almost animalistic. It stared at me for a moment, then disappeared into the darkness. I was frozen with fear. Rusty was going crazy, barking and pulling at his leash. I backed up toward the RV, keeping the flashlight trained on the spot where I had seen the creature. I could hear it moving around, circling the camp. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept the fire going and sat with my back against the RV, knife in hand. Rusty stayed by my side, growling and barking whenever he heard something. I was scared out of my mind, but there was nothing I could do except wait for morning. When the sun finally came up, I decided to pack up and leave. I couldn't stay another night in those woods. I quickly loaded everything into the RV, keeping an eye on the tree line. Rusty was just as anxious to leave as I was. As I drove away, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the creature following us, but there was nothing. We made it back to St. Louis without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I tried to put the experience behind me, but it haunted me. I did some research, looking for any stories or legends about creatures in the Ozarks, but I didn't find much. I told a few friends about what happened, but they just laughed it off, saying I probably had too much to drink. Years passed, but I never went back to the Ozarks. I sold the RV and bought a small cabin in the mountains, far from any forest. Rusty passed away a few years after the incident, and I got a new dog, but I never forgot that night. It wasn't until a few months ago that I heard something that sent chills down my spine. I was at a bar talking to an old friend who was into cryptids. I told him my story, and he listened intently. When I was done, he nodded and said, "Sounds like you ran into the Wendigo." The name struck a chord with me. I'd heard it before, a Native American legend about a creature that was once human, but had been transformed by a curse. It made sense, in a way. The creature I saw was almost human, but not quite. It was something else, something ancient and evil. I don't know if what I saw was really a Wendigo, but it was enough to keep me out of the woods for the rest of my life. I still have nightmares sometimes, waking up in a cold sweat, hearing the rustling of leaves and the distant growl of something in the darkness. So that's my story. It's not something I like to talk about, but maybe sharing it will help me move on. If you ever find yourself in the Ozarks, be careful. There's something out there, something that's been there for a long time, waiting. It was 2007, and I was assigned to the Fremont-Weinman National Forest in southern Oregon, where things generally stayed quiet. My name's Wyatt Durand, and I'm a search and rescue officer for the U.S. Forest Service. Not the kind of job where you run into grizzly types. No, our biggest concerns were usually lost campers or the occasional hiker with a sprained ankle. But that fall, the forest brought something else. The day started normal enough. I was sitting in the small outpost, finishing up a stale bagel and waiting for my partner, Saul Fletcher, to show up. Saul was one of those guys who never showed up on time, but at least he brought humor to the job. He said I was the stiffest SAR guy he'd ever met. Maybe he was right, but that day I wasn't complaining. The call came in around 8 a.m. A man named Richard Corbin had reported his brother, Alan, missing. Alan was an experienced backpacker, supposedly heading into the woods around Badger Lake 3 days ago. According to Richard, Alan wasn't the type to just wander off. He had gear, maps and a radio, but he'd gone dark, and Richard was getting desperate. I grabbed my pack, loaded up on supplies and waited for Saul to join me. When Saul finally arrived, 20 minutes late as expected, he had that grin on his face. "Wyatt, buddy, you look like you've already given up on life this morning." He shoved a thermos into my hands. "Coffee. Trust me, you need it more than I do." We drove out to Badger Lake, a spot nestled within towering pines, with steep trails that wound through rock formations covered in moss. It was the kind of place that felt endless, like you could walk for miles and never see another soul. Saul joked that the lake's quiet made it the perfect hideout for anyone who wanted to disappear, and I didn't argue. It was about an hour into our hike when we found Alan's campsite. His tent was still standing, but it looked like he'd left in a hurry. The fire pit had been doused hastily, with half-burnt wood still poking out of the ashes, and his pack, a solid green-frame backpack, was just lying there outside the tent, unzipped and empty. Saul frowned. Not a good sign. If he'd been planning to leave, he'd have taken his gear. We called out, yelling Alan's name, listening to our voices echo in the vast empty nothing. Just the wind rustling through the trees and that thick, eerie silence that only deep woods seemed to carry. Then we noticed the tracks. They were scattered around the site, like Alan had been moving in circles, maybe trying to evade something. But there was another set too, deep, uneven prints, like someone or something had been chasing him. Saul crouched down, his fingers brushing over the tracks. "Wyatt," he said, his tone unusually serious. "You ever seen anything like this?" The prints didn't match any animal I knew of. They were bigger than a bear's, with longer, almost skeletal impressions. I bent down to examine them closely, noting how the edges of each print were jagged, as though the creature's claws had dug into the ground with each step. "Let's keep going," I said, trying to shake off the unease gnawing at my gut. "Maybe he's just up ahead." We followed the prints for half a mile, pushing through dense underbrush, moving deeper into the woods. The trail seemed to get narrower, like the trees were pressing in, thick and close, blocking out sunlight. And that's when we found the first sign of Alan. It was his radio, broken in half, lying among the rocks. Next to it, the ground was splattered with what looked suspiciously like blood. Not a lot, just enough to make your stomach turn. Saul was dead quiet, which was unlike him. This isn't right, Wyatt. A guy like Alan wouldn't just break his own radio, and this blood, it doesn't look like a scratch. It looks like something got him good." I nodded, too focused to respond. We pushed on, the silence between us heavy. That's when we heard it, a faint noise, almost like scratching, coming from the trees ahead. We both froze, straining to listen. The sound was getting closer, rhythmic, dragging against the bark, like something large was moving slowly through the woods. Saul, despite his usual banter, gripped his flashlight like it was the only weapon he had. "Maybe we call it in?" he whispered, but I shook my head. We'd come this far, and whatever had left those tracks had to be found. We crept forward, our steps as quiet as we could make them, and then we saw it. At first, it looked like a silhouette, half hidden by shadows, standing unnaturally still between two massive trees. But as we got closer, details came into focus. The creature was hunched over, its limbs long and thin, with an almost insect-like bend to its joints. Its skin looked stretched, pale and slick, clinging to what little muscle it had, and the smell, a thick, cloying stench that made me gag. It was crouched over something, and as we got closer, I realized it was Alan, or at least what was left of him. The creature raised its head, and for a brief frozen moment, our eyes met. It moved slowly, almost methodically, like it was studying us as much as we were studying it. Then, with sickening slow motion, it reached a clawed hand toward Alan's torso, lifting something dark and wet to its mouth. Saul took a step back, and a branch cracked under his boot. The creature's head snapped toward us, its thin lips pulling back in a mockery of a smile, and then it moved. It wasn't a run, not like any animal I'd seen. It was a lurching, bounding motion, each limb twisting as it propelled itself forward. I barely had time to yell before it was upon us, slashing wildly. I remember the pain of something sharp raking across my shoulder as I scrambled backward. Saul was yelling, swinging his flashlight like a club, trying to keep it at bay. The creature was relentless, its arms swinging with unnatural speed, cutting through the air with a sound like tearing fabric. Saul managed to land a hit, cracking it across what might have been its collarbone, but the thing barely flinched. It turned on him, claws flashing as it lunged. He screamed, a sound that cut off abruptly, and I saw him go down under the weight of the creature, its limbs tangled around him like a spider wrapping up prey. In that moment, I felt something snap. Survival instinct, maybe. I grabbed Saul's flashlight, now slick with his blood, and swung it with every bit of strength I had. I felt it connect, heard a crunch as the creature staggered back, hissing before fixing its gaze on me. For a brief second, we stared each other down. Then it lunged again, but I was ready. I swung the flashlight up, catching it under its chin, driving it back just enough to make a run for it. I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs burned, until the forest thinned out and the trees finally gave way to the dirt road where our truck was parked. I stumbled toward it, hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys. As I slammed the door shut, I could see the creature standing at the edge of the trees, its pale form barely visible in the fading light. It didn't follow, it just watched, cocking its head to one side, like it was curious. Back at the station, I tried to piece together a report that didn't sound insane. They found Saul's body the next day, or what was left of it, tangled in the underbrush near Alan's remains. The tracks were there too, but no one could say for sure what made them. A couple of weeks later, I heard a rumor about old legends from the area. Supposedly, they spoke of a creature called the Thinning Walker, something that appeared in the woods when the fog was heavy and prey was plenty. My name is Kevin Scott, and this happened to me on October 15th, 2012. I'm not much for writing, but I wanted to get this down while it's still fresh. I'd been planning this camping trip with my buddies for a few months. We were all due for some time off, and I figured an RV trip would be the perfect getaway. The place we picked was the Black Hills in South Dakota. Not many people go there this time of year, and that's just how we liked it. My friends, Paul and Dennis, were excited too. Paul's a tall guy, used to play college basketball. Dennis, on the other hand, is short and stocky, but what he lacks in height, he makes up for with a loud personality. I picked them up, and we set off in my old RV, joking and laughing the whole way. We arrived at the campsite in the early afternoon. It was a small clearing surrounded by dense trees, and the nearest town was about 20 miles away. The place was quiet, almost too quiet, but we didn't mind. We set up camp, got the fire going, and cracked open some beers. We spent the evening talking about old times, our jobs, and our plans for the future. It was good to be away from everything, just us and the wilderness. After a few hours, Paul suggested we go for a night hike. I wasn't too keen on the idea, but Dennis was for it. "Come on, Randy, where's your sense of adventure?" Dennis teased. Reluctantly, I agreed. We grabbed some flashlights and set off into the woods. The night was clear, and the moon provided some light, but the forest was dark and eerie. We walked for about half an hour, joking around and making fun of each other's nerves. Then we heard it, a rustling noise coming from the bushes ahead. "Probably just a deer," Paul said, though he didn't sound convinced. We pressed on, but the noise persisted. It seemed to be following us, keeping pace just out of sight. Suddenly, Dennis stopped. "Did you guys see that?" he whispered. I looked where he was pointing, and for a brief moment I saw a shadow dart between the trees. "Let's head back," I said, feeling a knot form in my stomach. We turned around and started walking back to the RV, but the feeling of being watched stayed with us. The rustling grew louder, more insistent. Paul quickened his pace, and Dennis and I followed suit. We reached the RV and I locked the door behind us. "Hard pounding. Maybe it was just an animal," Paul suggested, but we all knew it didn't feel right. We stayed inside the rest of the night, not talking much. I barely slept, every noise outside making me jump. The next morning, things seemed normal again. We laughed off the night's events, attributing it to our overactive imaginations. We spent the day hiking and exploring the area, taking photos and enjoying the fresh air. By the evening, the previous night's fear seemed like a distant memory. As the sun set, we built another fire and settled in for another night of drinking and storytelling. Around midnight, Dennis decided to turn in early. "I'll catch you guys in the morning," he said, heading into the RV. Paul and I stayed up for a while longer, but eventually we decided to call it a night too. I was just about to head inside when I heard a noise. It was a faint, almost imperceptible whispering. I turned to Paul. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" he asked, looking around. "That whispering," I said, straining to listen. Paul shook his head. "You're hearing things, man. Let's get some sleep." We went inside, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the night. Just as I was about to drift off, I heard it again, whispering, clearer this time. I sat up, heart racing. "Paul, do you hear that?" Paul grunted, half asleep. "Hear what?" "The whispering," I said, my voice shaking. Paul sat up, listening. Then we both heard it, a low, guttural voice speaking in a language neither of us understood. We looked at each other, eyes wide with fear. "Dennis!" Paul shouted, jumping out of his bunk. We ran to Dennis's bunk, but he was gone. His things were there, but there was no sign of him. We searched the RV, calling his name, but there was no response. "We need to find him," I said, grabbing a flashlight. We ran outside, shouting for Dennis, but the forest was silent. We split up, searching the area around the campsite. I was about to give up when I heard Paul scream. I ran toward the sound, flashlight beam bouncing wildly. I found Paul standing over something, his face pale. He pointed with a shaking hand. There, on the ground, was a trail of blood leading into the trees. "We need to call for help," I said, pulling out my phone, but there was no signal. We followed the blood trail, our fear mounting with each step. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to be all around us, coming from the trees themselves. Finally, we came to a clearing, and what we saw froze us in our tracks. Dennis was there, or what was left of him. His body was torn apart, scattered across the clearing. Standing over him was a creature unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was tall and gaunt, with long, spindly limbs and a face twisted into a grotesque snarl. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and it seemed to be watching us, waiting. Paul and I backed away slowly, but the creature stepped forward, blocking our path. "Run!" I shouted, shoving Paul toward the trees. We ran blindly through the forest, the creature close behind. The whispering grew louder, more frenzied. I could hear Paul's heavy breathing, his footsteps pounding the ground beside me. We burst into the clearing where our RV was parked, and I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking. "Get in!" I yelled, throwing open the door. Paul scrambled inside, and I slammed the door shut behind us. The creature slammed into the side of the RV, rocking it violently. I started the engine, flooring the gas pedal. The RV lurched forward and I drove like a maniac, tearing down the narrow dirt road. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town. We stumbled into the local sheriff's office, babbling about what had happened. The sheriff, a grizzled old man named Tom, looked skeptical but agreed to send a deputy to the campsite. We waited anxiously as the hours passed. Finally, the deputy returned, looking pale and shaken. There was nothing there, he said. No blood, no body, nothing. Paul and I looked at each other, stunned. "But we saw it," I insisted. "We saw Dennis and that thing." The deputy shook his head. "I don't know what to tell you. Maybe you boys had too much to drink." We left the sheriff's office in a daze, not knowing what to believe. Dennis was gone, and there was no trace of him. We returned home, our trip cut short. Paul and I didn't talk much after that. We tried to move on, but the memory of that night haunted us. A few months later, I was doing some research, trying to make sense of what had happened. I came across a local legend, a creature known as the Knack. According to the stories, the Knack was a malevolent spirit that hunted those who ventured too deep into the forest. It was said to whisper to its victims, driving them mad before it struck. I don't know if what we saw was the Knack, but I do know that something terrible happened in those woods, something I can't explain. And every now and then when I'm alone at night, I hear the whispering, faint but unmistakable, and I wonder if it's still out there, waiting. My name is Gabriel Allen, and in 2017 I took my RV down to the rugged expanse of Big Bend National Park in Texas. Being a history teacher, I figured a solo trip might give me some new stories to spice up my lectures, or at least a decent tan. The open road was my escape from the usual grind of grading papers and dodging PTA meetings. I packed the essentials, canned beans, a stack of unread novels, and my old guitar. Nothing says midlife crisis like a man and his RV heading into the desert. As I drove deeper into the park, the scenery shifted from scrubby desert to towering canyons. The Rio Grande snaked its way through the landscape, a shimmering ribbon dividing two countries. I found a secluded spot near the river, far from any designated campground, peaceful and, more importantly, no Wi-Fi, just the way I wanted it. Setting up camp, I felt a wave of contentment. No emails, no student excuses about why their homework was late, just me in the vast wilderness. I strummed a few chords on my guitar, the sound bouncing off the canyon walls. The sun began to set, turning the sky into a masterpiece of reds and oranges. As night fell, I lit a small campfire and heated up some beans. The crackling fire and distant howls of coyotes were my only companions. Just as I was contemplating turning in, a faint light flickered atop a nearby ridge. Probably another camper, or perhaps a park ranger. I shrugged it off. After all, the desert is big enough for the both of us. The next morning, I decided to hike along the riverbank. The air was crisp and the scenery was postcard perfect. About an hour in, I stumbled upon something odd, a campsite that looked like it had been hit by a tornado. A tent lay torn open, and belongings were scattered as if someone had left in a hurry. Amid the mess, an old, weather-beaten journal caught my eye. Curiosity piqued, I picked it up. Flipping through the pages, I realized it belonged to someone named Logan Cooper. His last entry was 2 days prior, mentioning explorations of nearby caves and strange symbols etched into the walls. The final line read, "I feel like I'm being watched." Well, that's not creepy at all, I muttered. Maybe Logan was auditioning for a horror novel. Still, a chill ran down my spine, a feeling I couldn't quite shake. On my way back, I crossed paths with an old man carrying a heavy backpack. He had a face like worn leather and eyes that seemed to hold too many secrets. "Morning," I greeted. He gave me a long, searching look. "You out here alone?" "Just me and my RV," I replied with a grin. "Figured I'd get away from it all." He nodded slowly. "Be careful. The desert has a way of revealing things you'd rather not see." Great. Cryptic warnings from the desert sage. Next, he'll tell me to avoid the haunted cactus. "Thanks for the tip," I said aloud. "I'll keep an eye out." He stared a moment longer before continuing down the trail. Odd fellow, but I chalked it up to too much sun and not enough social interaction. Back at camp, the unease lingered. To distract myself, I decided to drive into the nearest town for supplies. The town was the quintessential dot on the map. A gas station, a diner, and a general store that looked like it hadn't changed since the 50s. At the diner, I ordered a coffee and struck up a conversation with the waitress. "Say, you wouldn't happen to know a Logan Cooper, would you?" I asked. She paused, her smile fading. "Can't say I do. Why do you ask?" "Found his journal near an abandoned campsite. Thought he might be a local." She leaned in. "People go missing out here from time to time. Vast place. Easy to get lost." "Comforting?" I said with a half-smile. "Remind me to leave a breadcrumb trail back to my RV." She didn't laugh. "You be careful now. Stick to the main roads." "Will do," I assured her, though my mind was already spinning tales. As I left, I couldn't help but notice the few locals in the diner eyeing me with what seemed like suspicion. Or was it pity? Either way, it was time to head back. That evening, the desert felt different. The silence was heavier, the shadows longer. I decided to stay inside the RV and dive into one of those novels I'd been meaning to read. Around midnight, a tapping sound jolted me from the pages. It was coming from the rear of the RV, probably just a desert squirrel auditioning for a horror movie, I thought. But then I remembered. No trees, no squirrels. Grabbing a flashlight, I stepped outside. The night was still, the moon casting an eerie glow over the landscape. I walked around the RV but saw nothing. Just as I was about to chalk it up to my imagination, I heard footsteps crunching behind me. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice betraying a hint of nerves. Silence. I swept the flashlight around. For a moment I thought I saw a figure in the distance, but it was too dark to be sure. My heart pounded. I backed toward the RV. A whisper floated on the wind. "Not safe here." I spun around. No one. "All right, Gabriel. Either you're losing it, or someone's playing a very unfunny joke," I muttered. Back inside, I locked the doors and decided that sleep was the best escape. Morning couldn't come soon enough. Stepping outside, I stretched and tried to shake off the night's weirdness. Then I saw it. Scratched into the side of my RV were the words, "Not alone." "Well, isn't that just peachy?" I said aloud. Maybe it was the desert's way of saying welcome. I decided then and there to pack up and move to a different spot, or better yet, head home. As I started the engine, I glanced in the side mirror. A man stood about 50 yards away, watching me. It was the old man from the trail, but his expression had shifted from mysterious to menacing. Time to go. I put the RV in gear. Driving down the winding road, I tried to rationalize what was happening. Maybe the locals didn't like outsiders. Maybe this was their way of scaring me off. If so, mission accomplished. Rounding a bend, I slammed on the brakes. A pickup truck was parked across the road, blocking my path. Before I could react, two men emerged, the old man and a younger guy with a scruffy beard and cold eyes. Both held rifles pointed directly at me. "Step out of the vehicle." The younger man ordered, "Is this about my extended warranty?" I quipped, hoping humor might diffuse the tension. "No," he barked. With no other option, I stepped out, hands raised. "Look, if this is about camping fees, I'm happy to pay." "Empty your pockets," the younger man demanded. I tossed my wallet and keys to the ground. "Take whatever you want." The old man sneered. "It's not about what you have, it's about what you know." "Okay, you've lost me," I said, heart pounding. "You found Logan's journal," he stated. "Logan? The guy whose campsite looked like a tornado hit it? Yeah, I found his journal. Didn't know it was a crime." The younger man stepped closer. "You read it?" "Just enough to realize the Yelp reviews for this place are severely lacking," I replied. He didn't appreciate the joke. "You think this is funny?" "Not particularly," I admitted, "but I've always been told I laugh in the face of danger. Bad habit." The old man raised his rifle. "Enough. We can't let you leave." "Wait, hold on," I said, thinking fast. "If you let me go, I'll forget I ever saw you." "Promise." Crossed my heart and hoped to... well, you get the idea. They weren't buying it. Desperate, I feigned a stumble, reaching down as if to steady myself. My hand closed around a fist-sized rock. In one swift motion, I hurled it at the young man's face. It struck him square on the nose. He screamed, dropping his rifle. Seizing the moment, I bolted toward the scrubland. Bullets kicked up dust around me as the old man fired. Adrenaline surged. I zigzagged, hoping to make myself a harder target. "Split up!" I heard the old man shout. Ducking behind a cluster of rocks, I tried to catch my breath. This is not how I envisioned this trip going, I thought. Next time, all-inclusive resort it is. I needed a plan. Peering around, I saw the younger man circling wide, blood streaming from his nose. The old man was methodically checking hiding spots. Spotting a fallen tree branch, I grabbed it and waited. As the younger man approached, I swung with everything I had. The branch connected with a satisfying thud. He crumpled to the ground. "One down," I whispered, though I knew the old man was still out there, and armed. I picked up the younger man's rifle. It felt heavy and unfamiliar. Should have paid more attention during those video game tutorials, I mused. Making my way back toward the road, I kept low. The old man was nowhere in sight. Reaching the RV, I climbed in, started the engine and floored it. As I sped down the road, the old man appeared ahead, standing in the middle of the path, rifle raised. A shot rang out, shattering the windshield. Glass sprayed everywhere, but I didn't slow down. "Sorry, no time for roadblocks," I muttered, gripping the wheel tightly. At the last second, he dove out of the way. I sped past, heart pounding, knuckles white. Hours later, I reached the park entrance and found a ranger station. Bursting inside, I tried to explain between gasps. The ranger stared at me, eyes wide. "Calm down, sir. Tell me exactly what happened." After relaying the events, law enforcement was called in. They found the younger man unconscious where I'd left him. The old man had vanished. A search of the area uncovered shallow graves, the remains of several missing persons, including Logan Cooper. The reality was grimmer than I could have imagined. Turns out Samuel Granger, the old man, was a former military survivalist gone rogue. He believed the desert was his domain and that outsiders were trespassers to be eliminated. His accomplice, Jacob Mills, had a record of violent offences. Together they had been preying on unsuspecting campers for years. "Well, that's one way to discourage tourism," I remarked when the detective briefed me. "You're lucky to be alive." He replied, "Trust me, I don't feel particularly lucky." They advised me to stay in town until they could ensure my safety. Jacob was in custody, but Samuel was still at large. A few days later I received a package at the motel, no return address. Inside was a single item, Logan Cooper's journal. Tucked between the pages was a note in scrawled handwriting, "The desert keeps its secrets." "Well, that's not ominous at all," I sighed. Law enforcement took it as a threat. They offered protective custody, but I declined. "I think I've had enough of small towns and deserts," I told them. Time to get back to grading essays on the Industrial Revolution. I returned home, the comforts of suburban life never more appealing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Samuel was still out there, lurking in the vastness of the desert. One evening, as I was locking up my house, I noticed a figure at the end of the street. For a moment, panic surged, but as the figure approached, I realized it was just my neighbor walking his dog. "Evening, Gabriel," he called. "Evening," I replied, shaking off the paranoia. Inside, I sat down and opened a book, but my mind wandered. Maybe a self-defense class wouldn't be a bad idea, or a really big dog. In the end, the authorities never found Samuel Granger. They believed he retreated deeper into the wilderness, his twisted mission unfinished. But they dismantled his operation and uncovered his crimes. They told me Samuel was a man driven mad by isolation and delusions of ownership over a land that belonged to no one. His motivations were rooted in a warped ideology that saw travelers like me as intruders to be eradicated. As for me, I decided future vacations would involve beaches, piña coladas, and lots of people. My name is Dylan Gonzalez, and all of this happened to me back in 1997 at the Great Sand Dunes National Park in southern Colorado, where I was working as a junior ranger straight out of a 3-year forestry program, with a desperate need to prove myself. I remember it started in late August. The summer crowds had thinned, and the dunes stretched out quiet under a blue sky that never seemed to end. We had fewer visitors that week, mostly older couples taking slow hikes, and a handful of backpackers testing their endurance on the sandy slopes. My supervisor, Clara Ortiz, insisted I carry extra water bottles and a small first aid kit. She liked saying, "Dylan, Those dunes are pretty until someone twists an ankle. Clara was older than me by at least 16 years and had a dry sense of humour that made me laugh even on stressful days. I had been eating a stale granola bar for lunch near the small visitor centre around noon. It was hot but not unbearable. I remember the air smelled faintly of warm sand and juniper. We had gotten a shipment of new trail markers the week before, and I planned to spend my afternoon swapping out old faded signs along the perimeter trails. Around 1:30, Clara radioed me. Her voice crackled. "Vic, you see anything off today?" "We got a hiker who checked in this morning and never returned. Name's Alan Chan, mid-20s, came alone." I replied that I had seen a solitary guy in a wide-brimmed hat heading toward the dunes, but nothing strange. Clara sighed. "Keep your eyes open. He didn't come back to his car. Maybe he wandered off route." I set out with a cautious stride, feeling a mild worry settle in my stomach. It was not unusual for someone to lose track of time. The dunes could be disorienting. Still, I felt uneasy. I hiked for about an hour, drifting toward a remote section where the sand piled high and the wind hummed in my ears. The clouds shifted overhead, turning the sky an odd shade of purple. By late afternoon, I found a bottle half buried in the sand that looked like the brand we sold at the visitor centre. The bottle was cracked, and there was a small dark stain on the sand nearby that I first thought was spilled juice or maybe coffee. I knelt down. It looked more like dried blood. I tried not to jump to conclusions, but my hands shook a bit. I radioed Clara. She told me, "Stay calm. Mark the spot. I'm sending Thomas and Aaron out to meet you." Thomas was a young seasonal ranger from Arizona, always cracking jokes. Aaron was a wildlife technician who rarely smiled but knew every bird species in the park. I waited. The sun sank lower, painting long shadows across the dunes. We had maybe 2 hours of decent light left. My mouth went dry and I sipped from my canteen. Thomas and Aaron arrived, breathing hard. Thomas, seeing my tense face, gave a half smile. "You look like you found something nasty," he said. Aaron examined the sand, nudging it with a boot. "That's blood," she said softly. I nodded and showed them the bottle. It might be the missing hikers. We spread out in a careful line, calling out the man's name. "Alan! Hey, Alan!" The wind swallowed our voices. I saw nothing but dunes and a few stunted shrubs. About 30 minutes in, Thomas stumbled onto a shoe. It was a hiking boot that looked new. 10 feet away, Aaron found a baseball cap with a sweatband inside. She whispered, "Dylan over here." I stepped over a gentle rise in the sand and saw something that made my stomach twist. There was a hand protruding from behind a low dune. It looked too still. I rushed over and found the hiker lying on his back, eyes open, face pale. It was not the kind of thing I'd forget. He had been torn open in a way that suggested more than a simple animal attack. His shirt was shredded. There were no footprints that matched a person's boots, only some strange depressions in the sand, as if something heavy had pressed down and slid. Thomas whispered, "What on earth?" And Aaron's face turned ashen. I heard her swallow. I tried to focus, breathing slow, feeling sweat trickle down my back. We agreed to mark the spot and head back to the ranger station. Night was not far off, and we had no desire to stay out there. On the way back, Thomas tried to lighten the mood. "You think it was a cougar?" Aaron shook her head. "No, the pattern's off, and I've never known a cat to leave a body like that." She was known for her blunt honesty. I wished she was less direct right then. We reached the station around dusk. Clara was waiting outside with a flashlight and a worried expression. "We need to report this," she said. "I'll call the sheriff. You three clean yourselves up. Don't say a word to the visitors tonight. We'll handle this quietly." Inside, I washed my hands. I forced down a few crackers. I noticed Aaron pacing, rubbing her temples. Thomas sat in a corner, muttering, "This is bad, really bad." The sheriff arrived with 2 deputies a couple of hours later. They asked us to lead them back to the spot. It was dark, and we carried strong flashlights. The dunes took on a strange quality at night. The moon gave a dull glow. The sheriff shined his light over footprints and mumbled something about needing a tracking specialist. As we approached the site, my heart sank. The body was gone. Only smears of blood remained. Aaron's eyes widened, and Thomas started cursing under his breath. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "You sure about what you saw?" he asked in a flat voice. Clara backed us up. "I trust my rangers. Someone moved the body." We fanned out carefully. I tried to stay close to Thomas because he was armed, and I only had a baton and a radio. That's when we heard a scream from the south side of the dunes. It was one of the deputies. We rushed over, stumbling, losing our footing in the sand. When we reached him, he was down, face pressed into the sand, limbs at odd angles. The second deputy shined his flashlight ahead, and for a second I caught a glimpse of something scuttling behind a tall patch of reeds near a seasonal creek bed. I could not identify it. It was large, maybe the size of a wolf, but too lean, and it moved sideways as if its back legs were weaker or twisted. We froze. The sheriff shouted, "Who's out there?" He aimed his service weapon. There was no response, only the soft hiss of shifting sand. We pulled the fallen deputy back. He was gone. Whatever had struck him must have hit fast and hard. I felt a wave of nausea. Thomas whispered, "Dylan, we got to get out of here." I nodded, my throat tight. The sheriff looked rattled now, which made me even more nervous. We carried the deputy's body back toward the station. Aaron kept turning around, shining her flashlight into the darkness. Twice, I thought I saw movement behind us, but I could not be sure. Back at the station, the sheriff radioed for more help. We locked the doors and turned off most lights, except for a small lamp on the desk. Clara stood by the window, holding a rifle that looked too old for comfort. I sat on a stool near the supply cabinet, trying to calm my breathing. Aaron paced again, muttering about how no known predators behave this way. She tossed out theories, maybe a rabid coyote or some diseased animal. Thomas said quietly, "Rabid animals don't drag bodies away like they're storing food. They also don't vanish without tracks." Around midnight, we heard something scraping against the outside of the building. It was a light, irregular sound that made my skin prickle. The sheriff killed the main lights and signaled us to stay quiet. I held my breath, gripping the baton with damp palms. Aaron picked up a fire extinguisher, her knuckles white. We waited. The scraping moved from one wall to another, as if searching for a way in. I tried to think logically. Maybe it smelled us. Maybe it was testing the building. I had no idea what it was, and that was worse than any guess. Thomas whispered a joke. Something about how he put in for a transfer to a more peaceful place, like a rest area off the interstate. I let out a shaky snort. Even then I appreciated his humor. It reminded me that we were still human, still in one piece, at least for the moment. After a few tense minutes, the scraping stopped. The sheriff nodded to Thomas and me. "We need to get back up out here. We can't sit all night." Clara shook her head. "There's a phone line, but it went dead after I called you folks. Radio is unreliable this far out. Reinforcements might come by morning. Until then, we hold tight." We took turns watching the windows. The moonlight slipped through the dusty glass, illuminating small details. A map pinned to the wall, a half-eaten candy bar on Clara's desk, the footprints we had tracked in on the floor. We waited, whispering about what this thing could be. Aaron recalled strange reports from old ranchers, talking about predators that adapted to dunes. Thomas rolled his eyes at that, but said nothing. I watched the darkness outside. Every so often, I imagined a shape shifting behind the parked jeep or near the trailhead sign. Sometime near dawn, we decided to move. If we could reach the main access road a few miles away, maybe we'd flag down a passing vehicle. The sheriff took point. I followed close, with Clara behind me, and Aaron and Thomas bringing up the rear. We left the safety of the building and stepped onto the cool sand. The sky was paling. We walked in silence, trying to move quickly but quietly. We carried what we could, flashlights, a rifle, a handgun, my baton. We made it about half a mile before I noticed Thomas lagging. "You okay?" I whispered. He nodded but looked nervous. Suddenly Clara hissed, "Down." We crouched behind a low crest of sand. Ahead, in a patch of scrub, something moved. The sheriff raised his rifle. I could see a shape. It had a broad chest, thin limbs, and a head that seemed too small for its body. The moonlight had been deceptive. Now, in the early dawn, I realized it was covered in sparse, dirty fur, and its body had patches of raw skin. It held something in its jaws, looked like a chunk of fabric, maybe the hiker's shirt. It made no sound. It moved in a jittery manner, as if injured or struggling. We tried to skirt around it, moving slowly. Aaron stepped on a dry twig. The snap echoed. The thing twisted its neck toward us. Without hesitation, the sheriff fired a shot. I expected it to drop, but it scrambled away, kicking up sand and vanishing behind a slope. We hurried on, hearts pounding. Clara mumbled something about how if that shot didn't bring help, nothing would. I kept glancing back, convinced it would return. I never got a good look at its face, just a vague impression of eyes too close together and a snout that didn't quite match anything I'd studied. By the time we hit the main road, the first hints of sunrise painted the dunes orange. We flagged down a park maintenance truck. The driver, a guy named Julio, looked puzzled when we told him what happened. He said he'd get word to the authorities. We piled into the back of his truck and rode in silence, watching the dunes fade behind us. I thought about Alan Chan's family. I thought about that deputy. I felt a strange guilt, as if I had failed them by not understanding what we faced. We never found the creature again. At least, not that I know of. The sheriff organized a major search. They found traces of blood and bits of clothing, but no clear answers. Officials suggested it might have been a rare predator, maybe a diseased animal, something that wandered in from a distant habitat. Nothing concrete. Clara quit 2 months later. Aaron transferred to another park. Thomas and I stayed a while longer, keeping our voices low when we talked about that night. Even now, when I think back to that time, I recall the silence in the dunes and the sight of that poor hiker, his body. I remember the scraping on the ranger station walls and how powerless I felt. I can still see something twitching in the half-light, some shape that shouldn't exist, something that had no name. We left that place with a lesson. We are not always at the top of the food chain. Sometimes we stumble on something that wants no part in our world, except to tear it open. I'm not proud of how scared I was, but I'm alive, and that's enough. And I know if I ever return there, I'll keep my distance from the far dunes, moving only in broad daylight, always checking the sand behind me. It was 1999, a year that's burned into my memory for reasons I'd rather forget. I've always preferred the quiet, the sort of silence you find out here in the dense forests of eastern Idaho. The army taught me that, how to appreciate the quiet. My name is Jeremy Harris, and I was a Green Beret, trained to handle situations most people can't even imagine. But there are some things they don't prepare you for, no matter how many drills you run, or how many nights you spend in the wilderness. This mission was supposed to be straightforward. No firefights, no insurgents to hunt. It was a training exercise, a solo recon out in the Clearwater National Forest. You might think they wouldn't bother sending a veteran like me for something that mundane, but I had a knack for navigating rough terrain, and they figured I'd use the time to scope out a few potential routes for future drills. It was the third day in, and I was camped by a creek, eating one of those MREs that taste like cardboard wrapped in nostalgia. I was thinking about how I missed real food, the kind my ex-wife Sarah used to make before things went south between us. I don't know, maybe that's what started the chain of bad luck, thinking about old mistakes. She used to say my job would eat me alive one day, like she had some kind of crystal ball. I was stirring the remnants of my meal when I heard the first snap, a branch breaking somewhere to my left. Now, animals do that all the time, but there's a difference between a deer stepping wrong and something with weight. My training kicked in, but I brushed it off. I'd faced worse than a curious bear or a lost elk. Then came the second sound, a wet crunching noise, like teeth breaking through bone. It made my skin itch. I stood up, grabbed my flashlight, and scanned the trees. Nothing, just a wall of dark, dripping with the moisture from the creek. I didn't like it, but I forced myself to sit back down. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a fallen tree, an overactive beaver, whatever. I tried to keep my focus on the map in front of me, charting out the route I'd take in the morning. That plan fell apart when the noise came again, closer this time. followed by a low, dragging sound, like something being pulled across the forest floor. That's when I realized this wasn't some lost hiker or an animal looking for a meal. This was something else. I grabbed my sidearm and flashlight and moved toward the sound, trying to keep my steps quiet. The crunching grew louder, and so did a wet, sucking sound that I'll never forget. It's the kind of sound that stays with you, even in the silence of your thoughts. As I edged closer, I caught a whiff of something foul, a mix of rotting meat and wet earth. I don't scare easily, but there's a difference between fear and knowing when you've walked into something you're not supposed to see. My light caught on a shape, a hulking mass hunched over something in the brush, broad shoulders moving with each grotesque motion. The thing was eating, and it wasn't eating anything that belonged out here in the woods. I stepped on a twig and its head jerked up. My light caught its face, or what I thought was a face. It had a snout like a boar, with sharp, uneven teeth jutting out at odd angles. The rest of it looked like some sort of twisted wolf, but larger, more muscular. Its skin hung loose in patches, exposing slick, pale flesh underneath. I know the size of predators, but this thing, it wasn't natural. It had to be 7 feet tall if it stood up. It dropped the half-eaten arm of what looked like a man, and I realized then that it had been gnawing on a body. The remains were torn apart, scattered in a mess of blood and flesh, with eyes staring up through the darkness, wide open and vacant. It sniffed the air, nostrils flaring as it caught my scent. I've seen fear in enemy combatants, but nothing compares to the raw animal rage in that thing's face. I fired off a shot, aiming center mass like I'd been trained, but it barely flinched. The sound echoed through the trees, and the thing let out this deep, rasping sound before it lunged at me. It moved faster than anything that big should, closing the distance between us in seconds. I ducked behind a tree, barely missing the swipe of its claws, each one like a sickle. My mind raced through every tactic I'd been taught, every move I could make. Running wasn't an option. I took aim again, this time for its shoulder, hoping to slow it down. The shot hit, and it snarled, more irritated than hurt. I stumbled back, slipping on the wet undergrowth, and my flashlight went flying, leaving me in almost total darkness. There was a clearing up ahead, maybe 50 yards. If I could make it there, I might have a chance to call for backup. I ran like hell, hearing it crashing through the brush behind me. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I kept pushing. The thought of what that thing could do if it caught me was the only motivation I needed. I burst into the clearing and turned, aiming my pistol again. It followed, slower now, favoring the shoulder I'd shot. I emptied the rest of the clip into its chest, but it just staggered back, not stopping. It wasn't invincible, but it sure as hell wasn't going down easy. I felt around for my spare mag, cursing myself for not bringing a bigger weapon. But then I noticed it, under the moonlight, glinting off something wrapped around its leg. A rusty trap, the kind you see in old hunter cabins, snapped around its ankle. It must have been dragging it for miles, and it was slowing it down. I kept my distance, watching as it struggled with the trap, trying to claw it loose. It gave me enough time to spot an old, half-rotten cabin just beyond the tree line. Maybe it wasn't much, but it was shelter. I bolted for it, not caring how much noise I made anymore. Inside, I found a rusted hunting rifle on the wall. It looked like it hadn't been fired in decades, but the box of shells next to it gave me a sliver of hope. I loaded it as quickly as I could, propping myself by the window, waiting for the thing to appear. It crashed through the underbrush moments later, dragging its leg, eyes locked on the cabin. I steadied the rifle, aimed and fired. The shot took it in the throat. It staggered, clutching at the wound, but then it looked up, and I swear it managed a twisted, almost mocking grin before it charged at the door. The rifle jammed. Of course it did. Just my luck. I grabbed a rusty machete from the floor and braced myself. When it broke through the door, I swung hard, catching it across the face. It roared and swung back, claws catching my side, leaving a searing pain that made me see stars. It didn't let up, pinning me to the ground with its weight, claws digging into my chest. I fought back, jamming the machete into its side again and again until it finally collapsed on top of me, heavy and stinking of blood and decay. I wriggled out from underneath, panting and bleeding, staring at the still body of that thing. I didn't know if it was dead, but I wasn't waiting around to find out. I staggered back to my camp, grabbed my radio, and called for an evac. They sent a helicopter out, and I didn't stick around to watch them clean up the mess. I heard later that they found the remains of 4 other people, all half-eaten and scattered through the woods. And the creature's body? Last I heard, they hauled it off to some undisclosed location, wrapped in a tarp. They told me to keep my mouth shut, that it was classified, that the families would get closure without knowing the truth. I nodded, signed their papers, and walked away. There was a time when I'd have fought them, demanded answers. But honestly, I was just glad to be done with it. I kept the scar across my ribs, though, a reminder, I guess. Not that I need one. You don't forget the sound of teeth breaking bone. My name is Gabriel Allen, and back in 2017, I decided to take my RV out to the remote stretches of Badlands National Park in South Dakota. Being a city dweller from Chicago, I thought some solitude might help clear my head, a sort of detox from the daily grind. Funny how the promise of peace can lead you straight into chaos. I've always been a fan of open spaces. Maybe it's because my apartment overlooks a brick wall, or perhaps it's the allure of horizons that don't end in skyscrapers. Either way, I packed up my RV with the essentials. Canned beans, a stack of paperbacks I'd been meaning to read, and enough coffee to fuel a small army. The drive was uneventful, which is more than I can say for most road trips I've taken. No flat tires, no wrong turns, just mile after mile of asphalt leading me away from the buzz of the city. As I pulled into the park, the rugged beauty of the Badlands stretched out before me, jagged rock formations painted in hues of red and orange. The kind of place that makes you feel both insignificant and profoundly alive. I found a secluded spot to park the RV, away from the handful of other campers sprinkled throughout the area. Privacy was the goal, after all. Setting up camp was a breeze. I even managed to assemble a folding chair without losing a finger, a personal victory considering my track record with DIY projects. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I lit a small campfire. The crackling of the wood was the only sound for miles, or so I thought. Just as I was getting comfortable, a rustling noise came from behind a nearby cluster of shrubs. Probably just the wind, I told myself, or maybe a rabbit. I wasn't exactly versed in the local wildlife, but I figured nothing out here would be too keen on bothering me. First night in the wilderness, and I'm already jumping at shadows, I muttered, shaking my head. I took a sip of lukewarm coffee and decided to call it a night. Sleep came surprisingly easy, but it didn't last long. Around midnight I was jolted awake by a distant scream, a sharp, piercing cry that echoed through the stillness. I sat up, heart pounding. Probably just a coyote, I whispered, though deep down I knew that wasn't the howl of an animal. Curiosity, or maybe stupidity, got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out into the cool night air. The campgrounds were enveloped in darkness, the kind that swallows the beam of a flashlight whole. I scanned the area but saw nothing unusual. "Is anyone out there?" I called out, immediately realizing how cliché it sounded. No response. Just the gentle whisper of the wind against the rock formations. I shrugged it off and headed back inside. Next time, maybe pack a sense of courage, I joked to myself, attempting to lighten the mood. The next morning, I decided to do a bit of hiking. The trails were well marked, and I figured a daytime adventure would be less unnerving. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every so often I'd hear the crunch of gravel behind me, but when I turned around, the path was empty. "Get a grip, Gabriel. You're not the star of some thriller novel," I chided myself. About an hour into the hike, I came across something that made my stomach churn. A campsite that looked like it had been abandoned in a hurry. A tent collapsed, belongings scattered, and a half-burned-out fire still smouldering. Maybe they left in a rush. Emergency, perhaps, I mused aloud. But the eerie silence suggested otherwise. I noticed a backpack leaning against a tree. Unable to quell my curiosity, I unzipped it and found a wallet with an ID, Mark Stevenson, a guy not much older than me. There were also keys, a phone with a dead battery, and a notebook filled with sketches of the surrounding landscapes. Doesn't look like someone who planned to leave, I thought. A rustling sound snapped me out of my thoughts. This time, it was unmistakably close. I spun around, but again, nothing. "All right, joke's over," I shouted, half expecting someone to jump out laughing, but there was only silence. Deciding it was best to head back, I started retracing my steps. The feeling of being watched intensified. Every crunch of leaves, every snap of a twig set my nerves on edge. Then I saw it. A figure in the distance, partially concealed behind a rock. I couldn't make out any features, but it was definitely a person. "Hey, you okay over there?" I called out. No response. The figure remained still. "Listen, if you're lost, I can help," I offered, taking a cautious step forward. Without warning, the figure darted behind the rock and out of sight. "Well, that's not ominous at all," I muttered. I picked up the pace, eager to get back to the safety of my RV. As I neared the campsite, a metallic smell hit me, sharp and unmistakable. Blood. My heart raced. As I approached my RV, the door was ajar, which I was certain I'd closed. Inside, the place was a mess, drawers pulled out, belongings strewn about, and on the small kitchenette table lay a hunting knife, stained red. "Okay, this is officially the worst vacation ever," I whispered, panic creeping in. A noise from the back of the RV made me freeze. Footsteps. Someone was still inside. Thinking quickly, I grabbed a heavy flashlight, my only potential weapon, and prepared myself. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. Silence. Then, a low chuckle emanated from the shadows of the hallway leading to the bedroom area. "Not funny, man! Show yourself!" I shouted. A tall figure stepped into the dim light, a man with a gaunt face, dirty clothes, and eyes that seemed devoid of any humanity. "Looking for something?" he sneered. "Listen, take whatever you want and leave. I don't want any trouble," I said, gripping the flashlight tighter. He tilted his head, a twisted grin spreading across his face. "But I've already found what I want." Without warning, he lunged at me. I swung the flashlight, connecting with his shoulder. He stumbled back, but recovered quickly. "Feisty one, aren't you?" he taunted. I didn't wait for his next move. I bolted out of the RV, sprinting toward the main road. My mind raced. There was no one around for miles, and my cell phone was inside. Behind me, I could hear his footsteps gaining. "You can't run forever," he yelled, laughter trailing his words. Spotting a cluster of rocks ahead, I veered off the path and ducked behind them, trying to catch my breath. "Great plan, Gabriel. Lead the psycho to an isolated spot," I chastised myself. I scanned the area for anything I could use as a weapon, nothing but rocks and dirt. The footsteps slowed. He was close. "Why make this hard on yourself?" His voice echoed, desperate. I remembered the small multi-tool in my pocket, a Swiss Army knife I'd brought along for minor repairs. Hardly intimidating, but better than nothing. As he approached, I steadied my breathing. The moment he rounded the corner, I kicked up a cloud of dust into his eyes. He snarled, rubbing his face. Seizing the opportunity, I plunged the small blade into his thigh. He let out a howl of pain. "That's going to leave a mark," I quipped, adrenaline fueling my sarcasm. He swung wildly, but I dodged and took off again, heading toward the abandoned campsite I'd seen earlier. Maybe there was something there I could use. Reaching the site, I frantically searched the scattered belongings. Then I saw it. A flare gun, half buried under a sleeping bag. "Time to light up your life," I muttered, grabbing it. He emerged from the trail, limping but no less menacing. "You're making me angry, and you wouldn't like me when I'm angry," he growled. "Did you really just quote the Hulk? Points for style, I guess." I shot back. He charged at me, and I fired the flare gun. The bright projectile hit him square in the chest, igniting his shirt. He screamed, desperately trying to pat out the flames. Not wasting any time, I ran past him, heading back toward the main road. Smoke filled the air, and his screams faded into the distance. After what felt like hours, I saw headlights, a park ranger's vehicle making its evening rounds. I stumbled onto the road, waving my arms. "Whoa there, are you all right?" the ranger asked, stepping out. "There's a man back there. He attacked me. I think he killed someone," I gasped. "Slow down." "Where is he now?" the ranger pressed. "At the abandoned campsite about 2 miles back. We need to call for backup," I insisted. He radioed for assistance and helped me into the vehicle. As we drove back, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and lingering dread. When we reached the site, there was no sign of the man, just the charred remains of his shirt and bloodstains on the ground. A team arrived shortly after and began a thorough search. Over the next few hours, they uncovered a shallow grave not far from the campsite. Inside were the remains of Mark Stevenson and another unidentified victim. "Looks like you stumbled upon something big," the lead investigator told me. "We've been tracking reports of missing hikers in this area for months." "Who is he?" I asked. "Name's Victor Reynolds," he replied. "Former military, gone rogue, wanted for multiple counts of murder." In that moment it all clicked. The abandoned campsite, the eerie feeling of being watched, the calculated way he hunted me. "Well, I always wanted a memorable vacation," I said, attempting a weak smile. The investigator shook his head. "You're lucky to be alive." I nodded, exhaustion washing over me. As they continued their work, I realized that sometimes the peace we seek comes with unexpected dangers. And perhaps next time, I'd stick to crowded beaches. I never thought much about camping alone. I'm the type who craves solitude now and then, the kind of person who finds peace in leaving the world behind for a while. When life back home becomes overwhelming, a trip into the wilderness always seems like the perfect escape. No phone calls, no emails, just nature and quiet. So when the stress of my life got to be too much, I decided to rent an RV and head into the heart of Texas Hill Country. The reviews for the campground I found were glowing, peaceful, remote, with a handful of other campers scattered across acres of forest. It sounded perfect, exactly what I needed to clear my mind. I arrived just before sunset, the orange glow of the dying sun casting long shadows across the narrow, winding dirt road leading to the campsite. The place was more isolated than I had expected. Maybe 3 or 4 other RVs scattered around the grounds, some tucked away in the trees. I parked my RV near the edge of the woods, feeling comforted by the distance from the others. I liked it that way, the quiet, the space. The campsite was alive with the sounds of evening, the chirping of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. I sat outside making a simple dinner, grilled chicken, some canned beans, and a cold beer. The sky above was clear, the stars starting to prick the velvet black of the night. I locked the RV doors before heading inside around 11:30 p.m. There was something about the stillness of the night that felt oddly comforting, like the world had paused for a moment just for me. I crawled into bed, the warmth of the blanket surrounding me, and drifted into a deep sleep. But then came the noise. It wasn't loud at first, just a soft click, like something shifting in the dark. I stirred, blinking into the darkness of the RV. For a moment I convinced myself it was nothing, maybe just a branch scraping against the metal. But then I heard it again, clearer this time, the unmistakable sound of the latch on the RV door being disturbed. My heart immediately started to race. I had locked the door, or at least I thought I had. The uncertainty gripped me. Could I have missed it? Did I lock it properly? But hearing that sound again, the click of the latch, made the air in my lungs tighten. I wasn't imagining it. Someone was trying to get inside. I lay there motionless, trying to steady my breathing, but every instinct in my body screamed that something was terribly wrong. Was it an animal? Maybe a raccoon or a deer? But no, that sound was too delicate, too precise. The door. Someone was tampering with the door. My mind was spinning, each second stretching out like hours. The only thing within reach was a small flashlight sitting on the counter next to the kitchen. Not much of a weapon, but it was all I had. I didn't want to move, but I knew I had to. If someone was outside, I needed to know who they were. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the nagging fear that making a sound, anything, would make things worse. I lay still, barely breathing, as the sound of the latch clicking grew louder. Closer. I could feel the darkness pressing in, thick and heavy, like it was alive, watching me. My body was frozen, but my mind was running a mile a minute. What if it was another camper? Why wouldn't they knock? Why would they open the door so quietly? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to move. My hands were trembling as I reached for the flashlight. My pulse thundered in my ears, each beat like a drum of panic. I grabbed it, turned it on, and made my way toward the door. Every creak of the RV floorboard seemed to echo through the small space, louder than the last. My breath was shallow, caught in my throat. I was trying to keep quiet, trying to stay as still as possible, but I felt like every movement could betray me. When I reached the door, I paused. My heart slammed against my chest. My thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind. I had to look, but part of me didn't want to. What if the man was right there, staring in through the window? What if he was already inside? I took a deep breath, then glanced through the small frosted window next to the door. The moonlight was dim, barely enough to make out anything, but there, in the shadowed distance, I saw a figure. It was standing too still, like a statue, and the feeling of dread that washed over me was immediate and overwhelming. My heart thudded in my chest as I realized the door was slightly open. Just enough for a person to squeeze through. My blood ran cold. Could it be another camper? Someone who'd gotten lost or drunk and decided to stumble onto my RV? But why hadn't they knocked? Why had they opened the door so quietly? And why did it feel like I wasn't supposed to see them? Then, without warning, the figure moved. I froze. There, standing halfway inside the RV, was a man. His face was so close to the window that it seemed to press against the glass, his eyes wide and unblinking, staring straight at me. The coldness of his gaze chilled me to the bone. It was like he had been waiting for me to notice him, to look into those eyes. I could feel my breath catch in my throat. Every instinct in me screamed to run, to scream, to fight back. But my body didn't move. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. He didn't say a word. He didn't make a sound. He just stood there, watching me. His ragged jacket swayed slightly in the breeze. His hair was matted, dirty, and his face was gaunt, hollowed by something darker than fatigue. There was something wrong about him. Something that wasn't just unsettling, it was dangerous. His eyes weren't wild or panicked. No, they were far too calm. It was the calmness of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone who was hunting. I didn't know who this man was, but every fibre of my being screamed that he wasn't here to talk. He wasn't here for a friendly chat. I had to act. I grabbed the flashlight, flicking it on and shining it directly into his face. The light illuminated his features in stark detail. His eyes reflected something more than madness. Something colder, like a predator staring down its prey. The light caught the sweat beading on his forehead, his uneven breath coming in ragged gasps. There was a flicker of recognition, but it didn't make sense. Had I seen this man before? Was he someone from the news? I could barely think straight. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I could feel the blood rush to my face. "Who are you?" The words came out of my mouth in a hoarse whisper. I didn't know why I even asked. What good would it do? He didn't seem interested in answering. He didn't respond. Instead, his hand reached toward the door, slowly pushing it open wider. It creaked, like a warning, like an invitation. My mind raced. What the hell was I supposed to do? I couldn't stay here. I couldn't run either, not with him blocking the doorway. But I couldn't wait for him to come inside. Then, just as panic started to take over, I heard it, a rustling, something in the trees, a truck engine, a distant hum growing louder. Closer, I wasn't alone. With pure instinct, I rushed to the driver's seat. My hands trembled as I grabbed the keys from the dashboard. With a desperate jerk, I shoved them into the ignition and twisted. The engine roared to life. The man outside flinched violently, jerking back as if the sound had physically struck him. And then I was gone of. I saw him drop low, crouching down just outside the RV's threshold, trying to shield himself from the sudden noise. His hands shot up in a defensive reflex, but as he did, something small, maybe a rock or some tool, clattered to the ground, the sharp sound echoing in the still night. The noise was enough to shake him, but it also bought me a precious second. Before he could react further, I slammed the RV into drive and floored the gas. The tires screeched on the dirt road, and the RV lurched forward, throwing me back into the seat. I didn't look back as the campground disappeared behind me. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I didn't know who that man was or how he had gotten so close without me hearing a single sound, but one thing was certain. He wasn't just lost in the woods. He was hunting. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't woken up. My name is Lawrence Mosby. I was 36 years old when this happened. I've been living in my RV for 3 years now, moving from place to place, always searching for the next quiet spot. I tell myself it's for the photography, the landscapes, the wildlife, but deep down, I know the truth. I don't want to be around people. Green Swamp was just another stop, a place to set up for a few days, get some good shots, and move on before anyone noticed I was there. The land stretched for miles, thick with palmetto and cypress trees, the kind of wilderness that swallowed people whole. I liked that. I shouldn't have gone so deep. I parked off a narrow dirt road past the designated campsites. It was illegal, but no one was going to find me out there. The first day was uneventful, just me, my camera, and the slow creep of the Florida heat. I hiked a bit, set up my gear near a clearing where I'd spotted a barred owl, and returned to the RV before sundown. Then the noises started. At first I thought it was an animal, a rustling in the palmettos, a soft shifting sound, like something moving just out of sight. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, expecting to catch a raccoon or a stray hog. There was nothing there. The trees stood still. The wind didn't move, but the feeling in the air, it was heavy, charged, like something was watching. I locked up and tried to sleep, but the feeling stayed. The next morning I checked my camera trap. It was gone. I'd left it mounted to a tree just 20 feet from the RV, aimed at the clearing, but the strap had been cut clean through. Not torn, not broken, cut. I swallowed my unease and chalked it up to poachers. I'd seen plenty of them in places like this, setting illegal traps or hunting without a license. Maybe one of them didn't want me filming. Then I found the footprints. They were barefoot, large, deep, leading into the palmetto. I turned back to the RV and spent the rest of the day inside, revolver within reach. That night something woke me up. A single, deliberate tap on the window. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Tap, tap. I reached for my flashlight, my fingers trembling, and flicked it on. The beam cut through the dark, landing on the window. There was nothing there. The palmetto rustled, though there was no wind. I stayed up until dawn. The next morning, I decided I'd had enough. I packed up, tossed my gear in the RV, and turned the key. The engine didn't start. I tried again. Nothing. I checked under the hood. Everything looked fine, but the battery was completely drained. Impossible. I'd just driven here 2 days ago, and everything had been working fine. I took out my solar charger and hooked up my phone. It was dead, too. I swore under my breath. I needed to hike back to the main road and flag someone down. I grabbed my revolver, my backpack, and a canteen and started walking. The forest felt different. Smaller, somehow. The trees leaned closer, their branches arching overhead like ribs in a carcass. The palmetto whispered as I passed. An hour in, I saw something up ahead. A figure, standing between the trees. My breath caught in my throat. It was tall, impossibly thin. Its arms hung too long at its sides. The sun was behind it, casting it in silhouette, but something was wrong with its face. There was nothing there. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, empty skin. I blinked, and it was closer. I didn't think. I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't stop until I saw the RV again. I locked the doors, drew the blinds, and sat with my back against the wall, my revolver clutched tight. I wasn't alone out here. The sun dipped low. The trees stretched long shadows across the ground. Then the radio turned on. At first just static. But underneath, something else. A voice. Faint, garbled. I turned the dial, trying to tune it in. It was my own voice. I froze. The radio crackled, and I heard myself speaking. "It's here. I see it." Then, another voice, low, whispering right against my ear, "Don't look at me." I threw the radio against the floor. The static didn't stop. Something slammed into the RV, the walls shook, the windows rattled. I gripped the revolver, sweat dripping down my back. Another hit, harder this time. A shadow passed over the window. I clamped my eyes shut. Don't look at it. Don't look. A whisper curled through the air, pressing against my skin. Trade places. The air turned heavy, thick like water. My chest felt like it was caving in. Something brushed against the door. The handle rattled. I swallowed a scream. Then silence. I sat there for hours, unmoving. The whispering never came back. When dawn finally broke, I threw the door open and ran. I ran through the swamp, my legs burning, my lungs raw. I ran until I stumbled onto a dirt road and collapsed. A hunter found me hours later, dehydrated, delirious. He radioed for help. When I told him where I had been, his face paled. You were in his part of the woods. I didn't ask who he was. A week later, I went back for my RV. The engine started on the first try. The battery was fine. My phone turned on, fully charged. I checked my camera. Most of the photos were normal. Trees, the clearing, the swamp. Then the last one. It was me, sleeping in the RV, taken from outside the window. I left Florida that night, but sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear the whisper, "Don't look at me." My name is Jason Shaw, and this happened to me on August 14th, 1987. I was a long-haul truck driver hauling freight across the country. I drove a beat-up Kenworth W900, and my route took me through some of the most desolate parts of the United States. This time, I was headed from Memphis to Albuquerque, a long, lonely stretch of road that I'd driven more times than I cared to count. I'd been on the road for about 10 hours and was making good time. The CB radio crackled occasionally with the usual chatter from other truckers, but mostly it was just me and the hum of the engine. I had planned to stop for the night in a small town called Tucumcari, New Mexico. I liked the place. It had a decent truck stop, and the folks there were friendly enough. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the flat, arid landscape. I had just passed through Amarillo and was pushing on when my truck started acting up. It began with a slight shudder, then a loud bang, and before I knew it, I was coasting to the side of the highway. I got out, cursing my luck, and popped the hood. The engine was steaming, and it didn't take long to figure out that my radiator hose had blown. I was stranded. I grabbed my toolbox and flashlight T, but I knew it was a lost cause. I didn't have a spare hose, and the nearest town was miles away. I got back in the cab and picked up the CB mic, hoping to catch a friendly voice. "Breaker 19, this is Roadrunner. Any of you good buddies got your ears on? I'm broke down just west of Amarillo, over." I waited, but there was nothing but static. I tried again. Still nothing. I sighed and leaned back in my seat. It looked like I was spending the night right there. I made myself as comfortable as I could and closed my eyes, hoping to get some rest before dealing with my situation in the morning. I don't know how long I had been asleep when I heard the knock. It was a light tapping on my window. Groggy, I sat up and looked out, expecting to see another trucker or maybe a good Samaritan. Instead, I saw a man standing there, silhouetted by the moonlight. He was tall and thin, wearing a dirty baseball cap and a tattered jacket. I rolled down the window just a crack. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Need some help?" The man replied, his voice raspy. "Yeah, my truck's busted. You got a phone or anything?" The man shook his head. "No phone, but there's a gas station a few miles back. I can give you a ride if you want." Something about him made me uneasy, but I didn't have many options. "All right," I said reluctantly. "Just let me grab my stuff." I climbed out of the truck, grabbing my flashlight and toolbox. The man watched me with an unsettling intensity. We walked over to his car, an old, beat-up sedan that looked like it had seen better days. I got in the passenger seat, and he started the engine. The interior was filthy, and the air reeked of stale cigarette smoke. We drove in silence for a while, the darkness of the desert enveloping us. I kept my hand on my flashlight, ready to use it if things went south. After about 10 minutes, I realized we weren't heading back toward Amarillo. The gas station should have been in the other direction. "Hey," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "I think you're going the wrong way. The gas station's back that way." The man didn't respond. He just kept driving, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Something was very wrong. "Listen, man, I appreciate the help, but I think I'll just walk back," I said, reaching for the door handle. Before I could pull it, the man locked the doors with a click that echoed through the car. "Stay put," he muttered. "We're almost there." "Almost where?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice from shaking. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned off the highway onto a dirt road. The car bumped and jostled as we drove further into the middle of nowhere. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a plan. I could try to overpower him, but he was bigger and probably stronger. I could wait for an opportunity to escape, but who knew when that would come? Finally, the car came to a stop in front of a dilapidated cabin. The windows were boarded up, and the place looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. The man got out and walked around to my side, opening the door. "Out," he said, his voice cold. I hesitated, then stepped out of the car, keeping my flashlight close. "What is this place?" I asked, trying to stall for time. "Shut up and move," he growled, shoving me toward the cabin. Inside, the place was even worse. The floor was covered in dust and debris, and the air was thick with the smell of rot. The man pushed me into a corner and tied my hands behind my back with a piece of rope he pulled from his jacket. My mind was racing, trying to figure out a way out of this. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to stay calm. He didn't answer. Instead, he walked over to a table and picked up a rusty knife. My blood ran cold as he approached me, the blade glinting in the dim light. I knew I had to do something, and fast. "Please," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "I've got money. I can give you whatever you want." The man smirked, the first sign of any emotion I'd seen from him. "It's not about money," he said quietly. "It's about making you suffer." Before I could react, he lunged at me, the knife slashing through the air. I managed to twist to the side, the blade cutting into my arm instead of my chest. Pain shot through me, but I didn't have time to think about it. I kicked out with my legs, knocking the man off balance. He stumbled back, giving me a moment to act. I struggled to my feet, my hands still bound behind me. I ran for the door, but he was on me in an instant, tackling me to the ground. We grappled, the knife inches from my face. I could feel his hot breath on my skin, the smell of sweat and tobacco overwhelming. With a burst of adrenaline, I managed to roll us over, pinning him beneath me. I brought my head down hard, smashing it into his nose. He grunted in pain, and I felt his grip on the knife loosen. I wrenched it from his hand and plunged it into his chest. He let out a strangled cry, then went limp. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding. Blood was everywhere, and the reality of what I had just done hit me like a freight train. I had to get out of there. I ran out of the cabin, my hands still bound, and made my way back to the car. I fumbled with the keys, finally managing to unlock the doors. I drove as fast as I could, not daring to look back. I made it to a gas station just outside of Amarillo, my arm throbbing from the wound. I stumbled inside, collapsing onto the floor. The attendant called the police, and within minutes I was surrounded by flashing lights and sirens. They cut the rope from my wrists and bandaged my arm before taking my statement. The man I killed was identified as Daniel Parker, a drifter with a long history of violence. He had been linked to several disappearances in the area, and it was clear that I was supposed to be his next victim. The police found the cabin, and inside they discovered evidence of his other crimes: clothes, personal items, and even a few bones. I was cleared of any wrongdoing, but the experience haunted me. I left trucking a few months later, unable to shake the memories of that night. I moved to a small town in Oregon, far from the highways and the nightmares that plagued me. I never forgot Daniel Parker or the fear I felt in that cabin. Life goes on, they say, but some scars never fully heal. I'm grateful to be alive, but every now and then I wake up in a cold sweat, the memory of his cold eyes staring into mine. It's a part of me now, a dark chapter in my life that I can't erase. My name is Jeffrey Walker. And in 1994, on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, I spent an entire afternoon trying to patch a busted water pump behind my uncle's old house, thinking I should probably learn a decent trade before my back got any worse and my sense of humor turned stale, like last week's fry bread. I remember the morning heat hanging over the empty fields, the kind of heat that settles into your bones and makes every chore feel heavier. I tried tightening a bolt until my knuckles throbbed, then stepped back to look across the land. A few cottonwood trees framed the horizon, and beyond them, low hills rolled into dry grasslands dotted with scraggly shrubs. From where I stood, everything seemed quiet, just the distant rattle of a pickup on a dirt road and a breeze stirring dust along the fence lines. I stretched my stiff shoulders, thinking how I wasn't getting any younger. I had no proper education, no significant savings, and a knack for fixing nothing but leaky faucets and rusted hinges. Still, I figured life would roll on as it always had, slow, steady, uneventful. Around midday, I decided to walk out to check on some horses my cousin Owen kept near the far edge of the property. Owen trusted me to look after them whenever he got tied up elsewhere. I wanted to make sure one that had recently cut its leg wasn't getting infected. I didn't own a gun, most folks around here did, but I always ended up spending my money on practical things like tools and cheap jokes. I used to say I was about as prepared for trouble as a cactus is for a flood. It was one of those lines nobody found funny except me. As I headed across the flat stretch, I noticed a strange hush. No bird song, no distant barking of dogs. My steps scraped on loose gravel, and I coughed a little from the dust. The horses usually wandered near a shallow watering hole, just a puddle this time of year. I reached the spot to find the horses milling nervously, eyes wide as if something had spooked them. One mare snorted, ears twitching, and the others bunched up as if trying to present a united front against an unseen threat. I took a step closer, scanning the ground. Tracks, fresh and odd, cut through the dirt near the edge of the puddle. They were elongated, claw-tipped, like those of some overgrown bobcat that had decided it wanted a pair of boots to go with its dinner. I knelt down, ran my fingertips lightly along the marks. The horses shifted behind me, restless. I stood, feeling uneasy. Perhaps a predator had wandered in looking for a meal. Coyotes and mountain lions sometimes ventured near, but these prints looked wrong. The spacing, the depth, too heavy, too deliberate. I cracked a weak joke to myself, something about how I'd discovered the world's first gym-going bobcat that skipped leg day. It made me smile nervously. Then I heard a scream. I sprinted back toward the house, heart pounding. The scream had come from the direction of my uncle's place. As I rounded the corner near the old picket fence, I saw my friend Quinton stumbling out of the workshop behind the house, clutching his forearm. Blood dripped between his fingers. He didn't cry out again, but the horror in his face said it all. I rushed over, snatching a rag from my pocket to press on the wound. "What happened?" I asked, voice low. He just shook his head, eyes darting back toward the workshop's open door. Inside that workshop, where I'd stacked planks of lumber and hung old tools, I caught a glimpse of something moving behind a half-finished shelf. It hissed, low and sharp. No words, just a sound that meant business. I eased forward, adrenaline pumping, afraid but curious. In that dim light I saw it, tall as a large dog but built more like a lean lynx, muscles strung tight under mangy black fur. Its head was elongated, ears tufted, and its teeth, too many, too long, curved inward like hooks. Its eyes were dark, reflecting the dull light. It reminded me of a wolverine that had decided to bulk up and take sides. Its tail flicked, once, twice, then it charged. I slammed the door and leaned against it, yelling for Quinton to run. My cousin Owen sprinted toward us from behind the main house, rifle cradled in his arms. He must have heard Quinton scream and come running. "Open it," Owen said, voice tight. "We can't let it roam free." I hesitated. Quinton groaned, pressing his wounded arm. The thing inside scratched at the wood, testing for weakness. I swallowed hard and stepped aside. Owen kicked the door open and fired a shot. Wood chips flew. The creature darted between shelves. Another shot rang out, missed. The beast lunged forward, batting at Owen's rifle and sending it clattering to the floor. I yelled something incoherent and threw the rag I'd used on Quinton's arm, as if that would help. It didn't. The creature pounced, knocking Owen against the wall. The smell of sweat and blood hung heavy in the enclosed space. Quinton yelled, "We have to get it out of there!" I felt useless, standing empty-handed, heart pounding like a drum. I snatched a broken hoe handle leaning near the door and jabbed it forward. The creature spun, jaws snapping, and tore into Quinton, who had tried to crawl toward Owen's rifle. Quinton cried out once, then fell still, his eyes open and glazed. I backed away, furious and terrified. Owen, dazed but alive, scrambled toward the rifle again. The creature lowered itself, ready to spring. Owen managed to get his hand on the gun's stock. Before he could raise it, the creature hurled forward, claws ripping through the fabric of Owen's jacket and into his chest. Owen gasped and the rifle fired once, shooting into the ceiling. Dust and debris rained down. The creature bit deep, shaking its head. I shouted, "Hey!" as if my voice could matter. I lurched forward with the hoe handle, aiming for its neck. The blow landed. Not hard enough. The creature turned its head, teeth glistening with blood. I felt my stomach tighten. I tried humor again, a desperate reaction. So much for a peaceful afternoon. It didn't laugh, it rushed me. I tripped backward, elbows striking the floor, pain shooting up my arm. I rolled, scrambling to the door, heart hammering. I needed a weapon, better than a stick. Outside, the dust had settled under a dull sky. I rushed to my uncle's truck, the old Chevy parked under a lean-to. The keys dangled in the ignition. Owen often kept a hunting knife in the glove box. I yanked it open, empty, except for a single candy bar and an old photograph of him and Quinton laughing over a broken engine block. I cursed under my breath, slammed the door and scanned the yard. My uncle's tools were scattered, a shovel, a hammer, a crowbar. Nothing that guaranteed victory. Then I heard scratching at the doorway. The creature slipped out, low to the ground, body tense with grim purpose. Across the yard, I saw my neighbor Wapasha creeping forward with his hunting rifle, face grim. I gestured wildly, pointing at the beast. He took aim. Fired once. Missed. The creature bolted toward him. Wapasha fired again. Winged it in the side. It howled, high and sharp, but kept coming. Wapasha tried to bolt. Too late. The beast leapt onto him, clawing at his throat. He dropped like a sack of grain, rifle skittering away. I ran for the rifle, heart in my throat. As I reached it, the creature turned to me, blood darkening its fur. We locked eyes, and I muttered a line so absurd I can't believe I said it. "You know, I'm not exactly a five-star meal, more of a drive-through snack." It crouched, tense. I raised the rifle, hands shaking. The beast moved first. I squeezed the trigger. The shot thundered, and the creature fell. Bruised but breathing, we survived. Bruised but breathing, at the end of that day, I stood outside again, rifle cradled in my arms. Dust settled over the land, and I took a long breath. I had no wisecrack, no joke. I only knew that I'd remember. Remember that one desperate day, that single terrible struggle with a predator no one had ever named. We had faced it, ended it, and proven ourselves capable of holding our ground. There was no mystery left to ponder, only a lesson. Sometimes the world holds creatures beyond our understanding. And whether they come from hungry desperation or twisted origins, we must meet them with all the courage we can gather. I never thought something like this would happen to me. I'm the type of person who always takes precautions, trusts my gut, and stays aware of my surroundings. But no amount of preparation could have prepared me for what happened that night in Lake Arrowhead, California. I had been living in my RV for about a year at the time. I wasn't doing anything extravagant, just working remotely, traveling around the West Coast, and enjoying the freedom that comes with living on the road. I had stayed in a lot of campgrounds, some more populated and some isolated. I love the peace of being out in nature, especially when I can park away from other campers. This particular night, I parked in a quieter spot near the woods, away from the main road. It was late October, so most of the summer tourists had already left, and the campground was almost empty. There were a couple of RVs a little further down, but nothing too close. I had the whole night to myself, and that's exactly how I liked it. Around 9 p.m. I made dinner, sat down to watch a show on my laptop, and settled in. The windows were closed, and the inside of the RV was warm, the small lamp on the table casting a soft glow over everything. Everything felt calm and safe. But then, around 11 p.m., I heard the knock. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. It was soft, almost tentative, like someone didn't want to disturb the peace too much. But then it came again. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't seen a soul for hours. And this late at night, who would be knocking on my door in the middle of nowhere? I cautiously got up and went to the small peephole in the door, but it was too dark outside to see anything. I could make out shapes moving outside, but nothing specific. I felt that prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the kind you get when something isn't right, but I tried to shake it off. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking a little. A man's voice responded almost immediately. "Hey, sorry to bother you. My car broke down just up the road. Can I use your phone to call for help?" I was confused. There were a few other RVs around, and if his car had really broken down, why hadn't he gone to one of them? It didn't make sense. "Where's your car?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "Just a little ways up the road," he answered. "I didn't see anyone else around, and I was hoping I could just use your phone." I didn't buy it. I knew there were at least 2 other RVs not far from me, and there were other campers on the main road. Why come all the way to me, especially at this hour? The more I thought about it, the more something felt wrong. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You should try the other RVs. They might be awake." There was a long pause. Too long. I could hear the man shifting outside, his footsteps moving back and forth. Then he said something that made my skin crawl. "Are you sure? I really don't want to be out here much longer. It's freezing, and I could really use a hand." A sudden urge hit me, to lock the door, to grab something to defend myself, but I didn't want to overreact. I took a deep breath and said, "I'm sorry. I'm just trying to relax tonight. Please leave." I thought that would be the end of it. But then the situation turned worse, much worse. I heard him step closer to the door, his voice now lower and more insistent. "You're not being very friendly. You don't want to make this harder than it has to be." My heart slammed in my chest. My instincts screamed at me to do something, anything. I stepped back from the door, keeping my eyes on the handle. I could see the shadow of him through the small window, pacing back and forth. "Listen," I said, trying to sound tougher than I felt. "I've already told you I can't help. Please just go." And then the door handle started rattling. My blood ran cold. He was trying to open it. My RV is old, but I made sure to lock it when I got inside, especially at night. But hearing the handle turn, feeling the slight jolt as he tried to force his way in, it terrified me. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. I couldn't think straight. I didn't know if I should call the cops or try to confront him. I knew that if he got in, I wouldn't be able to handle him on my own. Before I could make up my mind, there was a loud thud against the door. I jumped back, the sound reverberating through the thin walls of the RV. Whoever this guy was, he wasn't leaving. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the first thing I could find, a heavy flashlight. It wasn't much, but it was something. I tried to steady my breath, but then the door suddenly flew open. He wasn't just trying to open it. He had forced his way in. He pushed through the door so hard that it slammed into the wall behind it. And then, there he was, standing in front of me. I was frozen for a moment. He was tall, probably around 6'2" or 6'3", wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. His face was partially obscured by the hood, but I could make out a couple of tattoos on his neck. His eyes were wide, almost wild. I didn't even think. I just reacted. I swung the flashlight as hard as I could, connecting with his shoulder. He grunted, stumbling back, but he didn't fall. He grabbed my wrist with one hand, trying to yank the flashlight away from me. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't know what to do. I just knew I had to get away from him. I kicked, trying to break free, but he was stronger. His grip tightened on my arm, and I felt panic rise in my chest. That's when I saw it. A small kitchen knife on the counter, just a few feet away. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed it, my hand trembling, and with all the force I could muster, I stabbed toward his chest. I don't know if it hit him, but it was enough to make him pull back. He cursed under his breath and backed toward the door, looking almost surprised that I'd fought back. I wasn't waiting for him to think it over. I slammed the door shut as hard as I could and locked it. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone, dialing 911. I didn't even know if he was still out there, but I wasn't taking any chances. The cops arrived within 20 minutes, but by then the man was gone. They found a few footprints in the dirt outside. That was it. No sign of him. I ended up leaving the campground the next morning. I didn't feel safe there anymore, and I wasn't sure I'd ever feel safe staying alone in an RV again. Every time I think about it, my heart races. I keep wondering, what would have happened if I hadn't fought back? I don't know if this guy was just some random creep or if he had other plans, but I can tell you one thing. I'll never take my safety for granted again. To anyone out there who camps or travels alone, please be cautious. There's always someone out there watching, waiting for an opportunity. And when that opportunity comes, it's up to you to make sure you're ready. My name is Timothy Perez, and back in 2015 I decided to take my RV up to Lake Superior Provincial Park in Ontario for some peace and quiet. Being cooped up in the city was starting to make me feel like a sardine in a can, and I figured some fresh air might do me good. Besides, I've always believed that nature and I have an understanding. I don't bother it, and it doesn't bother me. I've never been the rugged outdoorsman type. My idea of hiking involves a well-marked trail and a picnic at the end. But the allure of the open road and the promise of solitude were too tempting to pass up. So I packed my essentials, a week's worth of snacks, a stack of books I'd been meaning to read, and enough coffee to fuel a small army. The drive was picturesque, with the trees flaunting their autumn colours like they were showing off. By the time I reached the park, the sun was casting a golden hue over the lake, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I found a secluded spot near the water, set up camp, and made myself a cup of coffee. This isn't so bad, I thought. Maybe I should write a book, Allah's Adventures in the Wild. As dusk settled, I decided to light a campfire. There's something hypnotic about watching flames dance. It's like nature's television. I was roasting marshmallows, because what's a camping trip without s'mores, when I heard footsteps crunching leaves behind me. Evening, a voice said. I turned to see a man standing at the edge of my campsite. He was tall and gaunt, with unkempt hair and clothes that looked like they'd been through a war zone. His eyes had a peculiar glint, one that made me instinctively uneasy. Evening, I replied cautiously. Can I help you with something? Just passing through, he said, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Name's Jedediah, but folks call me Jed. Allah, I offered, not that he asked. Beautiful night, isn't it? He stepped closer, eyeing the marshmallows. Sure is. Mind if I join you for a bit? Every alarm bell in my head was ringing, but I didn't want to be rude. Actually, I was just about to turn in, long drive and all. He tilted his head, the smile fading. Fair enough. You take care now. Will do, I said, watching as he disappeared into the shadows. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Well, that wasn't creepy at all, I muttered, deciding it was indeed time to call it a night. I extinguished the fire and secured the RV. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birds chirping and the smell of pine. I convinced myself that I'd overreacted the night before. Maybe Jed was just a harmless drifter. After breakfast, I decided to explore a nearby trail. I left a note on the dashboard, a habit from watching too many true crime shows, grabbed my backpack and set off. The trail was serene, with sunlight filtering through the canopy and leaves crunching underfoot. I was about an hour in when I noticed something odd, a campsite just off the path. But it looked abandoned. Curious, I ventured closer. Tents were collapsed and belongings were strewn about as if the occupants had left in a hurry. Unease settled in my stomach. This is how people end up in horror movies, I joked nervously to myself. I decided to head back. As I turned, I nearly bumped into Jed. "Whoa, you startled me," I exclaimed. "Sorry about that," he said, though he didn't sound sorry at all. "What brings you here?" "Just hiking," I replied, trying to sound casual. "You?" "Same," he said, his gaze fixed on me. "Shame about what happened here." "Yeah, looks like they left in a hurry," he chuckled softly, "or something made them leave." I swallowed hard. "Well, I should get going." "Don't let me keep you," he said, stepping aside. I walked briskly back to the trail, feeling his eyes on me the whole time. By the time I reached my RV, my heart was pounding. Maybe it's time to move on to another site, I thought. I started packing up when I heard rustling behind me. I spun around, half expecting Jed, but it was another man, this one wearing a park ranger uniform. "Sorry to startle you," he said. "I'm Ranger Thompson, just making my rounds." "Oh, thank goodness," I sighed in relief. "Everything all right? You look a bit shaken." I debated whether to mention Jed, but decided I might sound paranoid. "Just had an odd encounter earlier. Do you know a man named Jedediah around here?" The ranger's expression darkened. "Jedediah Clark? Yeah, goes by Jed," he nodded grimly. "We've had reports about him. I'd advise you to be cautious. He's not well." "Not well, how?" I pressed. "Look, it's probably best if you relocate to a more populated area of the park," he suggested. "Safety in numbers." "Understood," I said, feeling a knot in my stomach. "Thanks for the warning." As he left, I hurried to finish packing. Just as I was about to start the engine, I realized I'd left my map on the picnic table. I stepped out to grab it when something heavy struck me from behind. Everything went black. I awoke to a splitting headache and found myself tied to a chair inside what looked like an old cabin. The room was dimly lit by a single lantern, casting eerie shadows on the walls adorned with hunting trophies. "Rise and shine," came Jed's voice from the darkness. I demanded, struggling against the ropes. He stepped into the light, a sinister smile playing on his lips. "Company? Is that too much to ask?" "Kidnapping isn't exactly the way to make friends," I retorted. He laughed. "Oh, but we're past pleasantries now. Look, if it's money you want—" "Money?" he interrupted. "You think this is about money?" "No, Allah, this is about survival." "Survival?" He began pacing. "City folks like you come here thinking you own the place, leaving your trash, making noise, disrupting the balance. I'm sorry if I—" "Too late for apologies," he snapped. "You and your kind are a blight." "You're not making any sense," I said, trying to keep him talking while I worked at the knots. He pulled out a hunting knife, examining it thoughtfully. "Sense? Sense is living off the land, respecting its laws, not hiding in metal boxes on wheels." "Okay, noted. I'll just be on my way and promise to leave nature untouched," I said. He shook his head slowly. "Can't let you do that." Before I could respond, there was a loud bang on the door. "Jedediah Clark! This is Ranger Thompson! Open up!" Jed's eyes flickered with rage. "You just couldn't stay quiet, could you?" As he moved toward the door, adrenaline surged through me. I managed to loosen the ropes enough to free one hand. Without thinking, I grabbed a heavy wooden stool and swung with all my might. The stool connected with his shoulder, causing him to drop the knife and stumble. "You little," he growled. I didn't wait for him to finish. I bolted for the back door, bursting into the cool night air. Later, I learned that Jedediah Clark was a former survivalist who lost his grip on reality after a tragic accident claimed his family. He turned his anguish into misplaced vengeance against anyone he deemed an intruder. Next time someone suggests a nature trip, I'll politely decline and say, I'm outdoorsy in that I like having drinks on patios. My name is Dylan Gonzalez, and this happened back in 1999 in Wickford, Rhode Island, when I was still green enough to think that the hardest part of my job would be breaking up bar fights over the right way to cook clam chowder. I was raised not far from here, maybe 3 towns over, and I joined the local force for reasons that now seem almost naive, thinking I'd keep drunks out of trouble and help old folks feel safe at night. I'd been on the job a few months, and most days were quiet. The biggest case I'd handled involved a stolen bike that turned out to be borrowed by a neighbour's nephew. But things changed the evening that Merle, The mechanic who ran that grimy little garage by the Rotary didn't lock up on time. I noticed his shop lights burning well past closing, and when I poked my head in, I found his body lying beside a half-fixed sedan. He'd been stabbed, blood spread over the cement floor in a dark, uneven shape. His eyes were still open, like he'd been interrupted mid-thought. My hand shook as I called for backup. I'd never seen anything like it. Chief Auror arrived first. He was older, gruff, with a head full of silver hair and a way of asking questions that made you feel like you'd already messed up. He didn't say much that night, just examined the body and knelt beside Merle's toolbox. He picked up a bent screwdriver, turned it in the light, and muttered something I couldn't quite hear. Then he rose and said, "Bradley, we're going to need to talk to everyone who was around tonight. Start with the folks at the marina. Merle always worked late when he expected some out-of-town car. Might have been a stranger." I remember stepping out of that garage, the smell of rust and cheap motor oil still in my nose, trying to steady my breathing. Across the street, Miss Varr was at her window, her face pale and creased. She must have seen the commotion. I gave her a nod that was supposed to feel reassuring, but I doubt it did. I felt unsteady myself, like I'd walked into a room expecting a quiet conversation and found a fight breaking out instead. Early the next morning, I visited the marina. A few men stood by the dock, coiling ropes and cursing the gulls. I asked if they'd seen anything strange last night. Mo shrugged it off. One man, Dieter, said he noticed a guy he didn't recognize, a lanky fellow with threadbare jeans and a dirty brown jacket. Said the guy was walking along the waterfront, peering into the windows of parked cars. Dieter remembered this man because of the way he tilted his head as if he had a stiff neck. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, Dieter said. Couldn't guess his age. Maybe mid-30s, maybe older. He had this thin mustache and a sunken face, like he'd been living on nothing but coffee. Dieter went to talk to others, but nobody offered more than that. Just a stranger in town. Maybe a drifter. Maybe someone who had something to do with Merle's death. That night, I found myself driving slowly around Wickford's quieter streets, windows down, hoping to catch sight of someone who fit that description. I didn't think I'd know what to do if I spotted him. I wasn't exactly sure if I was ready to confront a murderer. But I wanted to at least feel productive. 2 days passed. I interviewed anyone who might have been near that garage. I pored over old records, asked about any similar cases, but got nothing. Then on a damp Wednesday afternoon we got another call. A fisherman named Roy was found dead behind the fish market. Same pattern, a knife wound. Nobody had heard a struggle. This time there were muddy footprints leading away toward the back alley. We measured them, men's size, about 10.5, and noted that the man likely dragged something along with him. There were scratches on the pavement, maybe from a broken crate he stepped over, or maybe from a piece of metal he carried. I felt my stomach twist. 2 murders in a week. Both victims town regulars. Roy was a kind man who gave free clams to kids on weekends. Seeing his body face down and cold made everything feel wrong. It pressed into my head the idea that I couldn't just patrol for unlocked doors and petty theft anymore. There was a killer here. Someone who moved fast and silent, then vanished. After Roy's murder, the tension around town grew. The local diner stayed crowded later, people clustering inside for safety. Chief Auror didn't give me much direction beyond keep asking around, as though he hoped I'd stumble into a clue. I tried not to show my fear, but my voice cracked when I told my neighbor Ruth to lock her doors. I made lame jokes about learning karate from a VHS tape, trying to keep things light. But nobody laughed. That Thursday night, I sat in the station house, just me and Deputy Cruz. He was older, always chewing gum. We were checking leads when we got a call from old Miss Vanny. She whispered that she saw a man outside her backyard, bending over something near her tool shed. Cruz and I rushed out, cruiser headlights cutting through the dark. We found footprints in the damp soil. No man. But we found something that made my heart pound, a bloody rag tucked under her porch steps. It smelled awful. I felt sweat along my collar. Whoever we were after, he'd been creeping close to homes. maybe looking for another victim. For the next several days, nobody died. I was grateful but uneasy. It felt like he might be waiting for something. That weekend, Chief Oror organized a patrol schedule that made our lives miserable. Cruz and I walked the streets at odd hours, peering into alleys and lots. I barely slept. Kept picturing that stranger's narrow face in my mind. Late Sunday afternoon, I visited the marina again. The boats bobbed in the greenish water. The gulls made a racket. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man hunched over near an abandoned bait shack, tugging something out from behind a pile of old lobster traps. I approached, trying to appear casual. "Hello there," I called. He turned slowly. It was the man Dieter had described, thin face, mustache, jacket stained with who knows what, eyes ringed with tired shadows. He squinted at me, like I was intruding on his personal business. "Evening," he said, voice quiet. I stepped closer, one hand near my holster. "I'm Dylan Gonzalez," I said. "Haven't seen you around before. You visiting?" He forced a grin. "Passing through," he said. Then he coughed and spat into the water. I noticed a slight tremble in his fingers and how he kept shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Heard about some trouble in town," he added, eyes narrowing. "People getting hurt. That must be hard on a small force." I nodded, trying to read him. "We're managing," I said. "Say, what's your name?" He frowned. "Name's Victor." He wiped his mouth and stepped back. He smelled of sweat and rotting fish, like he'd been sleeping near spoiled catch. "I should get going," he said, turning away. Before I could press him, he slipped behind the shack and around the corner. By the time I followed, he was gone. All I caught was a glimpse of his jacket disappearing behind a stack of crates. I had nothing to hold him on, but I knew something about the way he spoke, something about that grin. It made me uneasy. That night I told Cruz about Victor. We decided to keep an eye on the marina. We borrowed an old fishing skiff and stayed out on the water, watching the docks from a distance. Huddled together under blankets, we barely spoke, just sipped coffee and tried to stay awake. Around midnight, we heard a muffled cry. We scrambled out of the boat and onto the dock. The sound came from one of the old storage sheds behind the harbourmaster's office. We crept forward. "Police," Cruz called, a little louder this time. We heard a choking sound, then a heavy thump. The door to the shed was slightly open. I eased it open with my foot, flashlight high. Inside, a local handyman named Carl lay on the floor, his chest soaked in red. He wasn't moving. On the far side of the shed stood Victor, holding a long blade, his face twisted with anger. He looked startled to see us. Then he rushed forward. "Cruz, watch out!" I shouted, stepping in front. Victor swung the knife wildly. I jumped back, heart pounding, while Cruz tried to circle behind him. Victor slashed at Cruz's arm, opening a nasty wound. Cruz cried out and fell to one knee, clutching his arm. "Drop it," I yelled, drawing my pistol. Victor sneered. He lunged toward me, the blade flashing in the weak light. I fired once, hitting him in the shoulder. He staggered but didn't go down. Instead, he threw himself at me, knocking me into a pile of old ropes. My back hit hard and the gun flew from my hand. Victor raised the knife again. I could smell his breath, stale and bitter, and see the sweat on his brow. I kicked at his knee, making him stumble. "Cruz!" I yelled. "The gun!" Cruz groaned, reaching out, trying to find the pistol, but it had slid under a crate. Victor's blade grazed my forearm. The pain was hot, immediate. I pushed him off and scrambled backward, grabbing a loose metal pipe from the floor. He rushed again, and I swung hard, catching him in the jaw. He grunted and fell sideways, the knife clattering to the ground. I grabbed his wrist and twisted. He howled and tried to break free. Cruz found the gun and aimed it at him, blood dripping from his own arm. "Don't move," Cruz shouted, his voice shaking. Victor froze, eyes flicking between us. I pressed my knee into his back and wrenched his arm up. He whimpered. I patted him down and yanked his knife away. My heart hammered and I could barely think straight, but I knew we had him. We called for backup and an ambulance. Victor spat curses at us, calling us cowards, saying we had no idea who he was or why he did what he did. I didn't care about his motives right then. I cared about Cruz's wound and the bodies Victor had left behind. Carl was gone, just like Merle and Roy. The paramedics said nothing could be done. The quiet little marina now had a line of yellow tape and half the town staring. We booked Victor into custody. He said nothing after that initial outburst. Chief Orr looked relieved when he saw who we'd caught, though he didn't praise us. He just nodded and said, "Good work, Thompson." Cruz got patched up at the clinic, and I needed a few stitches on my arm. The doc asked me, "You okay?" I nodded, though I felt hollow. I spent the rest of that night in my small apartment, the TV off, sipping weak tea. I replayed the fight in my mind. I kept thinking of Carl's last moments, how scared he must have been. I thought of Victor's strange grin at the marina, the quiet way he slid into the shadows when I first met him. He was just a man. No special powers, no monstrous strength, just a desperate, violent man who chose to kill. For what reason? Money? Anger? Some twisted urge? I didn't know, and I guess I never would. But I realized something. Sometimes evil doesn't come dressed in cliches. Sometimes it's just a tired-looking man in a stained jacket passing through your town. The next morning, Wickford felt different. The dockside market opened late. The diners were quieter. People looked my way and nodded, thankful maybe, but not sure what to say. I still felt uneasy, like my job had changed forever. I'd never asked for heroic moments or epic showdowns. I wanted to keep things simple, to be the guy who told kids to wear helmets and helped old folks find their keys. But now, I knew what violence looked like when it crept into a small place like ours. Chief Orr told me Victor would face trial in Providence. We handed him off, and that was that. No fanfare, no big speeches, just paperwork and a bandage on my arm that I'd have to change daily. I kept my uniform pressed and my humor intact, but I knew I'd stepped into a new understanding of what it meant to wear that badge. Sometimes you find yourself alone in a shed, fighting against a killer with nothing but an old pipe in hand. I guess that's the kind of thing they never really teach you at the academy. And so it ended. But every time I passed that old marina, I remembered the sounds of that night. Cruz's shout, Victor's heavy breath, and Carl lying still. And I wondered how close we came to losing everything. My name is Brian Patel. I was 33 years old when it happened. People think journalists are fearless, but that's not true. We chase stories because we want to expose the truth. The problem is, sometimes the truth is something you were never supposed to find. This happened in Devil's Millhopper Geological State Park, Florida. I'd driven my RV out there looking for a fresh start, or at least, that's what I told myself. The truth was, my career was in shambles. A failed expose on a corrupt politician had left me blacklisted from every major news outlet. No one wanted to hire a journalist who fabricated evidence, even though I knew what I saw was real. So I ran, packed up my things and took a long drive through Florida's forests, looking for something, anything, to make sense of my life again. That's how I ended up here, parked on the edge of the massive sinkhole they called Devil's Millhopper. The locals told me not to camp too close. They spoke about strange noises, people who went missing, stories of voices calling your name in the night. I laughed it off. I didn't believe in that kind of thing. But I was a journalist without a job, and this was as good a story as any. I set up my RV, grabbed my camera, and hiked down into the sinkhole. The trail led into a deep, bowl-shaped pit surrounded by dense trees and waterfalls trickling from the limestone walls. It was beautiful in a way that made me uneasy, like something ancient was watching me. An hour in, I found something I wasn't expecting. A backpack. It was lying near the base of a tree, half covered in mud, the zipper broken. Clothes were strewn around it, along with a phone, cracked, battery dead. A woman's ID peeked out from the front pocket. Sarah Bennett, age 27. I stared at it, my stomach twisting. Had she just left it here? Gotten lost? Then I heard the scream. It came from deeper in the woods, a sharp, ragged cry that cut through the silence and stopped just as suddenly. I ran toward the sound. The trees grew thicker, and the path became harder to follow. I forced my way through, my breath loud in my ears. Then I stopped. A man stood just ahead, near the base of the sinkhole. He was tall, lean, wearing an old flannel shirt and jeans that were too clean for someone who had been hiking. His hair was slicked back, his skin pale. He smiled. "You shouldn't be here." I hesitated. "Did you hear that scream?" He tilted his head. "What scream?" I held up the ID. "This girl, she lost her bag out here. Did you see her?" The man stepped forward. "Maybe. A lot of people get lost here." Something about him put me on edge. His smile was too wide, too knowing. I backed away. "I should get back," I muttered. His grin widened. "Of course. I'll see you soon, Brian." My blood went cold. I hadn't told him my name. I turned and walked quickly back to my RV, refusing to look back. That night I locked the doors, checked the windows twice, and tried to sleep. But I couldn't. At some point I heard something outside, a soft tapping on the RV door. My heart pounded. I grabbed my flashlight and crept to the window, peering out. No one was there. Then, in the reflection, I saw movement behind me. I spun around, but the RV was empty. The next morning, I found something scratched into the dirt just outside the door. "Let me out." I packed my things. I was leaving. As I stepped outside, I nearly ran into someone. It was the man from the woods. "Leaving so soon?" he asked. I stepped back, gripping my keys. "Yeah, something feels off here." His expression flickered, just for a second, like he was disappointed. "That's a shame. You were supposed to stay longer." I forced a laugh. "Guess I'll have to come back some other time." He stared at me. Then he grinned again. "You've been here before." My stomach clenched. "What? You don't remember?" He took a step forward. "You were here last year. Same RV, same excuses. But last time, you didn't leave." My fingers tightened around my keys. "I don't know what the hell you're talking about." "You will," he whispered. I jumped into the RV, locked the door, and started the engine. The man didn't move. He just watched me. As I drove away, I caught one last glimpse of him in the side mirror. He wasn't smiling anymore. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. That night at a gas station an hour away, I found something in my back seat. A phone, cracked. Battery dead. Sarah Bennett's phone. I never went back to Devil's Millhopper, but sometimes when I close my eyes, I hear his voice. "You've been here before." My name's Jeffrey Walker, and this happened back in 1993 in the thick woods of the Boundary Waters up in Minnesota. Now, don't go thinking I'm the type to rattle easily. I'm Ojibwe. Been tracking and hunting since I was a kid, and that's the sort of training that gets you comfortable with the land and everything in it. But there are some things that not even a lifetime in the woods can prepare you for. It was just me and two others from the reservation, Joe White and Ethan Littlecloud. We'd all planned to camp, set some snares, maybe even see what was biting in the lake. Joe was our practical joker, thought everything was funny. And Ethan, well, he was the quiet type, good at reading the land, real level-headed. So if things got tense, I trusted we'd be smart enough to stick together. We hiked in early that morning. There's this old ranger cabin along the lake, barely standing and about as appealing as roadkill stew, but it was good enough to drop our gear. By evening, we'd set up snares and cast our lines without much luck. The forest was thick, the kind where you feel the weight of the trees pressing in from all sides. Sound travels strange out there, muffled like you're walking underwater. I chalked it up to the dense foliage, but Joe was already making jokes about cursed forests and ghost stories. At one point, Ethan, who doesn't get rattled by much, muttered something about the silence. Birds, squirrels, even the usual mosquito hum seemed absent. I brushed it off, figured we'd just set up camp in a quiet patch. That night, after a few swigs from Joe's flask and a bad attempt at telling ghost stories, we heard something out there. Now, we'd all heard strange noises in the woods before, things that can send a shiver down your back if you're out there alone. But this was different. Low, grating, like the sound of heavy logs being dragged against each other. Joe started laughing, saying it was just Ethan's stomach, but there was an edge in his voice. He was joking to cover something up. Ethan squinted into the darkness, and I could tell he didn't like this one bit. The sound came closer, slow but steady, like whatever it was didn't mind being heard. Then came a wet thump, like something heavy being dropped, followed by silence. The three of us froze, ears pricked up like hounds. Then the sound started again, closer this time. I could see Ethan's face had gone stone-cold serious. Joe whispered something about checking it out, trying to seem braver than he was. Ethan motioned for silence, then tilted his head toward the trees. He was good with gestures, and what he was saying was clear. He didn't like this one bit. I told Joe to sit tight, but he was already grabbing a flashlight, muttering that he was just going to have a look. As soon as Joe clicked on that flashlight, the beam caught something about 55 yards out, halfway hidden behind the trees. The first thing I saw was that it was tall, easily 6, maybe 8 feet, with long limbs ending in thick, clawed fingers that looked more like gnarled branches than anything human. It had this bent, hunched posture, as if it was studying us, deciding whether we were worth the effort. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and the muscles underneath rippled like a deer's hide. Its face was narrow and stretched back, almost lupin, with a snout like a wolf, but longer, more angular. But the worst part? Its mouth was open, and I swear, the teeth were jagged, mismatched, like a bear trap someone had tried to put back together wrong. Joe whispered something that sounded suspiciously like a prayer, and for a second I was tempted to join him. The creature moved closer, not in a lunge, but this slow, deliberate stride, like it had all the time in the world. I'd been stalked by mountain lions before, had coyotes trail me for hours, but this was something else. Ethan nudged me, his voice barely a breath, suggesting we slip back to the cabin. I nodded, trying not to make any sudden moves. Joe, on the other hand, looked like he was about to bolt, his hand clamped around that flashlight like it was his lifeline. We edged backward, every muscle tense. But Joe slipped on a root. The creature's head whipped toward us, and it let out this dry, rasping sound, like sandpaper scraping against rock. Joe was back on his feet in a second, but that was all the invitation it needed. Ethan shouted for us to run, and we bolted. I didn't look back, just pumped my legs as fast as they'd go, hearing Joe's labored breathing right behind me. The thing gave chase, and it wasn't slow. I could hear it thrashing through the underbrush, getting closer with every step. The sound of branches snapping and something scraping over stones and dirt was deafening. I remember thinking we'd make it back to the cabin, that we'd slam the door and huddle inside until dawn. But then Joe stumbled. This time, he didn't get back up in time. Ethan and I turned just as it reached him. The thing's arm shot out, grabbing Joe by the shoulder and dragging him backward like he weighed nothing. Joe screamed. A sound that'll stick with me longer than I care to admit. Ethan wanted to go back for him. I could see it in his face. But the look in my eyes must have told him there was no point. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't something we could fight off with a hunting knife or a flashlight. We made it back to the cabin, slammed the door shut, and barricaded it with whatever we could find. We huddled there in the dark, waiting, barely breathing. The sounds outside grew quiet, but every so often I thought I could hear something scraping against the walls. Ethan whispered that it was just the wind, but we both knew better. At first light, we crept out. The forest looked different, like the trees were hiding something, like the ground itself had shifted. Joe's body wasn't where he'd been taken, but there was a trail of disturbed earth and bits of fabric. Following it felt like a death sentence. But we couldn't just leave him, not without knowing what happened. The trail led us to a small clearing about a mile out, where the soil was darker, stained with something I didn't want to examine too closely, and there, scattered among the leaves, were bones. Not all of them Joe's, either. Some looked older, gnawed down and broken. Like whatever that thing was, it had been feeding out here for a long time. We didn't linger. We headed straight back to the ranger station, filed a report, and were met with a look that told us we wouldn't be taken seriously. They called it a bear attack in the paperwork. But neither of us believed that for a second. As for Joe, they found bits of his clothing and some bones, enough to confirm he was dead. But the rest was chalked up to scavengers. Ethan stopped coming out to the woods after that, and I don't blame him. Years later, I heard whispers from some of the older folks on the res about an old creature they'd warned people about. A mix between a man and a beast, something that hunted in the quietest parts of the forest. They didn't give it a name, just said it was something that didn't belong here, something that waited. I don't go out there anymore either. And if you ever find yourself near the Boundary Waters, maybe think twice before wandering too far from camp. My name is Kevin Scott. I was 35 years old when it happened. I'd been living out of my RV for the past 8 months, travelling across the country, writing about forgotten places and hidden gems. It was supposed to be an escape from my ex-wife, from my old life, from the custody battle I knew I was never going to win. This happened in Little Talbot Island, Florida. I picked the spot because it was quiet, off the beaten path, and beautiful in a way that most beaches weren't. No high-rises, no tourists, just rolling dunes, thick patches of forest, and the endless stretch of the Atlantic. Perfect for the kind of travel blog post I was planning. I pulled into the campsite late in the afternoon. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the sand. The ranger at the entrance had given me a strange look when I told him I was camping alone. "Storm's coming in," he said, eyeing the darkening sky. "Might want to stay closer to town." I shrugged it off. A little bad weather didn't scare me. I'd been through worse. I parked the RV in a secluded spot near the dunes, set up my gear, and spent the evening taking photos. As the sky darkened, a thick mist rolled in from the water, swallowing the landscape. It happened so fast, like a wave crashing over the dunes. Within minutes, the world beyond my headlights was gone. That's when I saw them. 2 pinpricks of red light, barely visible through the fog, hovering just above the dunes. At first, I thought they were taillights from another camper's vehicle, but they didn't move. They just watched. I blinked, and they were gone. I laughed to myself, probably just my imagination. I'd been on the road too long. That night I locked the doors and stretched out on the tiny bed in my RV, listening to the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. But sleep didn't come easy. At some point, I heard something, a soft, rhythmic scraping. I sat up, heart pounding. The sound came from outside, right next to the RV. I reached for my flashlight and crept toward the window, moving slowly, carefully. My breath fogged up the glass. I saw footprints in the sand, large, deep. They circled the RV, stopping right at the door. I yanked the curtain shut. The next morning I found something else, a message carved into the sand just a few feet from my RV. "Don't run." The letters were long, jagged, like they'd been made with something sharp. I took a photo, my hands shaking. Maybe some was messing with me. Maybe this was a local trying to scare off outsiders. Or maybe it was something else. I spent the afternoon hiking the trails, trying to shake the uneasy feeling in my gut. I kept telling myself there was a logical explanation. The wind, the tide, my own paranoia. But then I found the tent. It was buried beneath the dunes, half collapsed, the fabric shredded. Inside there were old camping supplies, a torn sleeping bag, and a journal. The pages were damp, the ink smudged, but I could still read some of the entries. Something is watching me. Every night it gets closer. I saw the eyes again. They never blink. I tried to leave, but the tide, I keep walking in circles. I don't know if it's me or this place, but I can't find my way out. It waits until I'm too tired to fight. I can hear it breathing. I closed the journal and stood there, heart hammering. Had someone else been here before me? Had they gotten out? As the sun set, I made a decision. I was leaving in the morning. That night, the power in my RV flickered. The radio crackled, the station tuning itself, static giving way to something else. A voice, my own voice. "Stay, stay, stay." I lunged forward and turned the radio off. My reflection in the dark screen stared back at me, but for a split second I swore. I swore I saw it blink. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes I felt it, something just outside, watching. At some point I heard scratching. Not at the door, on the roof. Something was up there. I held my breath, gripping my pocket knife, listening as the slow, deliberate movement shifted above me, claws against metal. Then silence. Then a voice. My own voice, whispering from just beyond the RV. "Mike," I didn't move. "Mike, let me in." I pressed a hand over my mouth. It sounded exactly like me, like I was standing right outside. A shadow passed across the window. I didn't sleep after that. By sunrise, I was ready to go. I threw my things into the RV, turned the key. Nothing. The engine was dead. I sat there, breathing hard, trying to stay calm. I had jumper cables. I could fix this. I could get out. Then I heard footsteps, slow, dragging. I turned my head and saw them. The red eyes, not just one pair, 3, 4, 5. They hovered above the dunes, blinking in and out of existence, moving closer. I grabbed my flare gun and bolted out the door. I ran, not toward the road, toward the beach. The tide was high, the waves crashing against the shore. If I could just make it to the water, maybe they wouldn't follow. Behind me, the footsteps grew faster. I turned, raised the flare gun and fired. The light illuminated the dunes for just a moment, and I saw them, tall, thin, moving wrong like marionettes with their strings tangled. No faces, just those glowing red eyes and long, gaping mouths. Then they screamed. The sound was worse than anything I'd ever heard, worse than gunfire, worse than sirens, worse than the worst moments of my life. I turned and sprinted for the water. Then, nothing. The next thing I remember, I was in a fishing boat, an old man shaking me awake. "Jesus, son," he muttered. "What the hell were you doing out there?" I looked back at the shore, but the beach was empty, the dunes undisturbed. They were gone. Or maybe they had never left. I never went back for my RV, never even tried. I didn't care about my gear, my laptop, my camera, because when I checked my phone later, I found something that made my blood run cold. A photo. The last picture I had taken. Me. Standing on the beach, and behind me, half visible through the mist, the red eyes. Watching, waiting. I don't know what they are, but I know they're still there. I had always been good with directions, or at least I thought I was. In fact, growing up in Oregon, I had this uncanny sense of where everything was around me. But then again, anyone can make a mistake, right? I'm sure I could blame fatigue or the bad GPS signal, but none of that changes what happened. It was 2007. I had just gotten back from my second deployment in Iraq and was itching for a break. My buddy Drew had mentioned this cabin out near the Idaho border. His family owned it, though no one had really been up there in years. It sounded perfect, isolated, quiet, tucked away from the world. I needed that kind of escape, and honestly, I couldn't wait to fish, maybe have a beer or two in the stillness of the woods. Drew and I had served together, so there was this unspoken bond. We'd been through a lot, and the idea of spending a few days off the grid with him felt like a perfect way to unwind. He wasn't much of a talker, but that worked for me. I liked my quiet too. I should have known something was off when Drew's directions started to seem a bit vague. He'd written them down on the back of a napkin, of all things. "It's pretty straightforward," he said. "You follow the logging road for about 10 miles, make a left at the old hunting shack, and then take the next fork. Shouldn't be more than a couple of hours." It sounded simple enough at the time. The trip started fine. We left early, the sun just creeping over the horizon as we packed my truck with coolers and gear. Drew's ancient Chevy sputtered along behind me on the 2-lane highway, and I followed his truck down the dirt road leading into the woods. Everything seemed normal, like it should be, but the deeper we went, the more things started to change. The trees closed in, and the path narrowed. What was once a dirt road gradually turned into something that looked more like an overgrown trail, barely wide enough for the truck. It was supposed to take just a couple of hours, but by the time we reached the fork Drew had mentioned, it felt like we'd been driving for days. "I swear it's just up ahead," Drew muttered as I stepped out of the truck to stretch my legs. We hadn't seen another soul for hours. "Man, this place looks abandoned. Are you sure this is right?" I asked. He scratched his head, looking around like maybe he wasn't so sure anymore. Yeah, it's gotta be. I remember this turn. Kind of." His words didn't exactly inspire confidence. We pushed on, deeper into the forest, further than I was comfortable with. The air started to get thicker, the kind of thickness that sticks to your skin. I tried not to overthink it, chalking it up to my nerves. After all, I hadn't been in nature like this in a long time. But something was wrong. I could feel it. It wasn't until we hit the clearing that things went from weird to unsettling. The cabin wasn't much of a cabin at all. It looked like it hadn't seen human life in decades. The windows were boarded up, the roof sagging in the middle, and the front porch was nothing more than a few rotting planks of wood. "This is it?" I asked, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. Drew shrugged, grabbing his gear from the truck. "It'll do." I followed him inside, kicking up dust with every step. The place smelled like mold and decay, and the only thing keeping the roof from collapsing was sheer stubbornness. That evening, we set up a small campfire outside, and Drew started to relax, cracking open a couple of beers while we reminisced about the old days. For a few hours, I almost convinced myself that everything was normal, that maybe I was just overreacting. But that feeling in the pit of my stomach, the one telling me we'd made a mistake, never really went away. It was around midnight when things started to get worse. We heard it at first, a faint sound, like someone moving through the trees. I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but it didn't take long to realize it was something else entirely. Drew was halfway through telling some old story when he stopped mid-sentence. He looked over his shoulder, squinting into the darkness. "Did you hear that?" I nodded. "Probably just an animal." "Yeah, probably," he echoed, but his face didn't look convinced. The sound got louder, footsteps, heavy and deliberate, coming closer and closer to our campfire. Drew stood up, grabbing the shotgun he kept by his side, and I followed his lead, pulling my knife from its sheath. "Who's there?" Drew called into the darkness. No answer. He fired a warning shot into the trees. The sound echoed through the forest. For a moment everything went quiet. Then we heard it. Laughter, low, guttural laughter, like it was coming from all around us. Panic started to creep in. "We need to leave," I muttered, grabbing my gear. But before we could make a move, they stepped out from the shadows. There were 3 of them. Barely human. Filthy. Covered in dirt and grime. Their faces were twisted in unnatural ways, like they'd been living out here for years, far away from civilization. One of them was missing an arm, but that didn't seem to slow him down. Drew raised his shotgun again, but before he could pull the trigger, they rushed us. It happened so fast, I barely had time to react. One of them tackled Drew to the ground, wresting the shotgun from his grip and turning it on him. The blast echoed through the night, and just like that, Drew was gone. I ran. I didn't even think about it. I just ran. The forest felt like it was closing in on me, the branches tearing at my clothes as I stumbled through the underbrush. I could hear them behind me, their footsteps quick and erratic. Every now and then I'd catch glimpses of them darting through the trees like animals, grinning that horrible, twisted grin. I don't know how long I ran, but by the time I stopped, I was completely lost. The adrenaline was pumping through my veins, and my chest felt like it was going to explode. I could still hear them somewhere in the distance, laughing. I knew I couldn't outrun them forever, so I did the only thing I could think of. I climbed a tree. It wasn't the smartest plan, but at that point, I didn't have many options. I found a thick branch and pulled myself up, trying to stay as quiet as possible. For what felt like hours, I sat there, holding my breath, waiting for them to find me. But they never did. They passed by underneath me, still laughing and mumbling to each other in some garbled language I couldn't understand. Once they were gone, I climbed down, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stand. I didn't know where I was or how to get back, but I knew I had to keep moving. There was no way I was staying in those woods. The next few hours were a blur. I stumbled through the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like one of them. Eventually, I found my way back to the truck. The sun was just starting to rise, casting an eerie glow over the forest. Drew's truck was gone, or maybe it had never been there. At that point, I didn't know what was real anymore. I got in my truck and drove. I didn't stop until I was back on the main road, far away from that place. I never told anyone what happened, not the cops, not Drew's family, no one. They'd never believe me anyway. They'd just say Drew got lost in the woods, maybe had an accident or got attacked by some animal. But I know what I saw. Drew didn't just disappear. Those people, those things, they're still out there, somewhere in those woods, waiting for the next poor soul to take a wrong turn. My name is Bobby Stevens. I was 42 years old when this happened. I should have never gone into that swamp. It was supposed to be a fresh start, just Michelle and me, one last chance to fix our broken marriage. She thought if we got away from everything, my drinking, the fights, the memories of that firehouse call that still kept me up at night, we'd remember what we used to be. Travis, my old friend, suggested Big Cypress. It's quiet, off the grid, he said. No distractions, just you, the wife, and nature. I'll even come along for moral support. I should have said no. We picked up Caleb on the road. He was 19, scrawny, nervous. He had that jittery look kids get when they've been running from something. Said he was escaping an abusive stepfather. He had a black eye, so I believed him. Michelle thought we should help. Travis didn't care either way. We set up deep in the preserve, miles from the nearest ranger station. No tourists, no cell service, just towering cypress trees and the wet stink of the swamp. It was beautiful in a way, but there was something off about the air. Too still, too heavy. The first sign that something was wrong was the noises. They started the first night, whooping calls in the distance, strange and guttural, not animal sounds, not human either. Michelle thought it was an echo, some trick of the swamp. Caleb wasn't so sure. He claimed he saw something watching us from the trees. But when I looked, there was nothing there. The next day I found something worse. A skull half buried in the mud near our camp. Not an animal's, human. I showed it to Travis. He just smirked. Probably an old hunting accident, he said. Nothing to worry about. Michelle wanted to leave. I should have listened to her. That night the noises got closer, scratching against the RV walls, footsteps in the brush. I sat outside with my hunting knife, my heart hammering. At some point, I must have dozed off. Because when I woke up, Caleb was gone. We searched for hours, calling his name, but the swamp swallowed our voices. Then we heard it, screaming, a sharp, panicked cry, cut off too soon. We ran toward the sound, but all we found was his torn-up shirt, nailed to a tree. "This ain't right," Michelle whispered. Travis stayed quiet. We went back to the RV. The air felt thick, suffocating. I locked the doors, gripped my knife tight. Sleep never came. Then, around 3 a.m., something changed. One moment I was lying there, staring at the ceiling. The next, I was awake, but not in bed. I was tied to a tree. Thick, coarse rope bit into my wrists. My head pounded. I could hear the wet, slapping sounds of something moving in the dark. And then, Travis, standing there, grinning. "Sorry, buddy," he said. "We're all just trying to survive." A shadow moved behind him. A figure stepped forward, tall, gaunt, its face hidden behind a mask of human bone. More of them emerged from the dark, filthy and wild, their bodies scarred, some missing fingers or ears. Cannibals. I thrashed against the ropes, but they were too tight. "Where's Michelle?" I rasped. Travis just chuckled. "She's with them now. They like the women fresh." Rage burned in my chest. "You son of a—" He crouched in front of me, tilting his head. "Listen, Bobby, these people, they've been here for centuries. They own this swamp, and they don't let outsiders leave." A scream pierced the night. Michelle. I saw red. I tore at the ropes until my wrists bled. The cannibals laughed, clicking their teeth together like a sick kind of applause. Then one of them got too close. I lunged, biting down on his ear. He shrieked, recoiling. And in that moment of chaos, I twisted my body, snapping the branch I was tied to. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed a rusted machete from the nearest cannibal's belt and swung. The blade bit deep into his neck. Blood sprayed warm against my face. The others howled, lunging for me, but I was already running. I tore through the swamp, my breath ragged, my legs burning, but I didn't stop. I followed the screams. I followed her. Then I saw it. A clearing lit by torches, wooden cages stacked like livestock pens, blood-stained bones littering the ground, and Michelle, bound, shaking, her face streaked with tears. A man stood over her, taller than the rest. The leader. His skin was covered in swirling scars. In one hand he held a jagged knife. "Stop," I bellowed. He turned, lips curling into something too wide to be a smile. Then Travis stepped out of the shadows. "I told you," he said. "They don't let outsiders leave." Something in me snapped. I charged, swinging the machete. I caught Travis in the side. He went down, screaming. Michelle kicked the leader in the gut, scrambling away just as I lunged, the blade buried into his chest. And he laughed. Actually laughed, before crumpling. The others hesitated. Their leader was dead. They didn't know what to do. We ran. I grabbed Michelle's hand, dragging her through the swamp. We found Caleb, locked in a cage, bloody but alive. The cultists came after us, screeching in fury. We ran until we reached the river, where a half-rotted canoe lay half-sunk in the reeds. We pushed off, paddling with raw, shaking hands. Behind us, figures stood at the tree line, watching, not chasing, just watching. By the time we reached the ranger station, I collapsed from blood loss. I woke up in a hospital. The police found nothing. No camp, no bodies, just our burned-out RV. Travis's body was never recovered. Caleb disappeared from the hospital 2 days later. Weeks later, Michelle and I tried to move on. Then I got a text, an unknown number. We never forget our own. My name is Lucas Norris, and this all went down back in 1997, right outside Great Bend, Kansas. I wasn't a farmer, but I owned a chunk of land with a decrepit barn and a trailer that smelled like burnt coffee and regret. My dad's old place, which I inherited because no one else wanted it. I spent most days tinkering with old radios and small engines. It was nothing glamorous, but people needed their stuff fixed, and I liked being the guy to do it. My ex-wife used to say I had a knack for fixing everything but myself, which was probably true. The nights out here were quiet, which suited me fine, until one wasn't. I was out in the barn that evening, trying to rewire a busted ham radio that a guy from 3 counties over had brought me. Static crackled faintly through the old speakers, almost rhythmic, like something tapping against my brain. I shook it off, told myself I'd been drinking too much gas station coffee. The light over my workbench flickered, and that's when I heard the first scream. It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal either. It had a pitch, a kind of warbling that seemed to twist in on itself. I froze, my hands gripping the pliers like a lifeline. A second scream followed, closer, slicing through the air like a blade through fabric. I stepped outside. The air felt heavy, like a storm about to break, but the sky was clear. My truck sat 20 yards away, and for a moment I thought about leaving. Then I saw the field. There were lights. Not like car headlights or even those high beams farmers use to scare off deer. These were blue and pulsating, hovering low over the corn. It was hypnotic, almost beautiful, until I realized they were moving. They weren't stationary. They were coming toward me. Something instinctive made me bolt for the truck. My keys were in my pocket, but my fingers fumbled like they'd forgotten how to work. Before I could get the door open, the lights hit me. It wasn't just light, it was sound, like a low hum that bypassed my ears and went straight to my bones. My legs gave out and I hit the dirt hard. When I came to, I was in a circular room. The walls glowed faintly, and the floor seemed to ripple under me like liquid metal. I tried to move, but my arms and legs were strapped to a table. The straps weren't leather or nylon, but something translucent, almost alive. I tested their strength, pulling hard. They didn't budge. "Human designation Lucas Norris," a voice said. It was deep, resonant, and oddly polite, like someone reading off a checklist. I craned my neck to see who or what was talking. They weren't human. Their bodies were tall and wiry, covered in a metallic sheen that shimmered like oil on water. They had no mouths, but the voice was clear as day, like it was coming from inside my skull. Their heads were oblong, with ridges where a nose might have been. "Where the hell am I?" My voice cracked, but I tried to sound steady. "Spatial Junction 547, Sector 8. Your designation is irrelevant. Your utility will be determined." "My utility?" I snapped, yanking against the restraints. "I'm not a damn lab rat." One of them moved closer, its body bending unnaturally, as if it had too many joints. A thin, needle-like appendage extended from its arm, glowing faintly. "Your anatomy will be catalogued." "Catalogue this," I barked, thrashing against the table. The needle hovered inches from my chest, and that's when I felt it, a sharp, burning pain in my ribs. My vision blurred, and for a moment I thought they had pumped me full of something. But then I heard it, a woman screaming. It wasn't me, it wasn't my voice, it was someone else. The sound was raw, agonized, echoing through the room. One of the creatures tilted its head as if annoyed. "Interference," it said. The walls shimmered, and a second later a body slammed against them, a human body. A woman, mid-30s, dressed in what looked like a mechanic's uniform. She was bleeding from her temple, her eyes wide with terror. "Help me," she gasped, her voice hoarse. Before I could respond, the nearest creature lunged toward her. She was fast, faster than I expected. She ducked under its arm and grabbed something from her belt. It looked like a welding torch, but emitted a bright, concentrated beam that sliced through the creature's arm like butter. The severed limb hit the floor with a wet, metallic thud. "Lucas, right?" she said, breathless. "Can you move?" I blinked. "What the hell is happening?" "No time for introductions. Do you want to live or not?" "Yeah, that'd be great." She pressed something on the table and the restraints released. I scrambled to my feet, every muscle screaming in protest. The creature she'd attacked let out a sound like static on a dying radio. The others began to close in. "We've got maybe 2 minutes before they adapt," she said, shoving the torch into my hands. "Don't miss." "What is this?" "Plasma cutter. Point and burn." The creatures advanced, their metallic bodies shifting and twisting like liquid. One of them lunged, and I swung the torch wildly. The beam cut across its torso, splitting it in two. The halves dissolved into a puddle of viscous silver goo. "This is not how I thought my Tuesday was going to go," I muttered. "Welcome to my world," she shot back, pulling something from her pocket. It looked like a handheld detonator. She pressed the button, and part of the wall disintegrated, revealing a narrow corridor. "Move!" she yelled, dragging me forward. We ran. The corridor twisted and turned like a maze, every surface glowing faintly. The sound of the creatures echoed behind us, a relentless, mechanical hiss. My lungs burned, but adrenaline kept me moving. "What are they?" I panted. "Ceres," she said. "Artificial life forms." "Not the time for a history lesson," I snapped. "What do they want?" "Biological data. They're mapping us, our species, our weaknesses. You were just next on the list." "Great. So how do we stop them?" "We don't," she said grimly. "We escape, and if we're lucky, we take a few of them out on the way." The corridor opened into a massive chamber. In the center was a platform with what looked like a control panel. She sprinted toward it, her fingers flying over strange, glowing symbols. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Reprogramming their navigation system. If I can override it, I can send this whole damn ship into a star." "That's comforting," I said dryly. "Got a better idea?" I didn't. The Ceres burst into the chamber, their bodies flowing and reforming as they moved. I activated the plasma cutter, swinging it in wide arcs. 2 of them fell, their forms collapsing into pools of shimmering liquid. "Hurry up!" I shouted. "I'm working on it!" she snapped. One of the Ceres reached for her, its needle-like arm extending. I didn't think. I just moved. The plasma cutter sliced through its torso and it crumbled, but not before another one grabbed my leg. "Cover your ears," she said. "What?" The blast was deafening. When the light cleared, the Ceres were gone and she was dragging me to my feet. "We've got 30 seconds, she said. "To what?" "Run." We sprinted. The ship trembled. A portal opened. "You first," she said. I dove through. A moment later we were back in the field. The sky was eerily quiet. "Who are you?" I asked. She hesitated, then smiled. "Let's just say I'm not from around here." Before I could press her further, a distant rumble shook the ground. I looked up just in time to see a bright flash in the sky, followed by a streak of light plunging toward the horizon. "What was that?" I asked. "Their ship," she said. "Or what's left of it." I nodded, unsure what to say. She turned to leave, but I grabbed her arm. "Wait, why were they doing this? What's their endgame?" "They're scouts," she said, "the first wave. If they'd finished their work, the next wave wouldn't be far behind. And now we've bought some time, but they'll be back." She walked away, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there for a long time, staring at the horizon. My bin was still standing, the ham radio untouched on the bench, but everything else had changed. Later that week, I found strange markings burned into the dirt where the sites had stood. Symbols, like a warning. I didn't know what they meant, but I had a feeling I wasn't done with them yet.